Chapter 126. The air was humid and heavy, making it hard for people to breathe, as if they were in a steamer. The little eunuch Lian Song, who was guarding outside Funning Palace, was just about to quietly loosen his collar and take a breath when he heard head steward Zhao cough softly beside him. He immediately retracted his hand and continued to stand there respectfully, like a loyal and lifeless stone statue. This was one of the highest places in the entire imperial palace. Following Song Chuaxian's gaze, one could see many overlapping and complicated palaces. Those usually dazzling golden glazed roof tiles, under the dark clouds that were so heavy that they were almost black, appeared lifeless. He was silently in a daze. He had lived in the imperial city for 14 years and had never seen such abnormal weather in spring. However, whether it was the dark clouds above or the faint thunder in the sky, they all indicated that a storm was coming. This year was truly a demonic year. He only heard about imperial concubine Qi's maternal family during lunch. The fourth young miss of the Qi family, Qi Zhaoyu, who often came to the palace, had recently been pestered by a wolf demon. Thinking about it made people tremble. Should he learn from the other seniors and go to the Buddhist temple to ask for a peace talisman to keep him safe? If he really had to go, should he go to Wanfo Temple or Da Xianghua Temple? Da Xianghua Temple. Imperial concubine Qi had made a name for herself in Wanfo Temple, but she had fallen in only 4 months. It could be seen that Wanfo Temple was not that effective. However, he vaguely heard that the third prince had once paid his respects in Da Xianghua Temple and asked for a lot. Now, he had fallen to the fate of being imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. It could be seen that Da Xianghua Temple was just fishing for fame. He had secretly asked his master why the third prince had done such a foolish thing when he was already the eldest son of the emperor. His master looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, although the third prince is the eldest son of the emperor, His Majesty has never appointed him as the crown prince. What does this mean? It means that His Majesty is not too satisfied with him. As the other princes became adults one after another, the third prince naturally could not remain calm and could only make a risky move. As for ending up like this, that was his fate. Lian Song, oh Lian Song, your brain is only as big as an almond. How can you understand the matters in the palace? In the future, don't think about it anymore, and don't ask random questions. Only by doing your job well will you be able to keep your almond-sized brain. He nodded and felt that his master was right. After he finished his recollection, he sighed softly in his heart. Originally, he could take a break every 10 days, but because the frequency of His Majesty's old illness relapsing was increasing, he had already been on duty for many days in a row. Everyone was busy and worried. He really did not know when the next break would be. So tired, so tired. Just as he was imagining things in his head, suddenly all of you, die. A loud roar came from within Fu Ning Palace Hall, followed by a series of rapid breathing. Manager Zhao hurriedly called out in a low voice, quick, quick, and led the group of palace maids and eunuchs into the hall to serve. Some handed out warm handkerchiefs, some wiped his body, and some changed his clothes. In short, they were all very busy. Everyone was very familiar with their own tasks because in recent days, the emperor had already lost count of how many nightmares he had had in the past few days. Lian Song deftly helped the emperor change his clothes. Then, he heard a familiar voice and a familiar fragrance walk in. Your Majesty, did you have nightmares again? His voice was full of worry. It was Consort Qi. She was dressed in a red palace dress, gorgeous and beautiful. She held a bowl of boiling medicine and sat in front of the dragon bed. She scooped up a spoonful and blew on it. Then, she personally drank a mouthful in front of His Majesty and carefully fed it to His Majesty. This medicine has just been brewed. I personally watched over it. The medicine is at its best right now. I will serve you. Chapter 127. Seeing Consort Qi's behavior, the emperor slowly opened his mouth and swallowed the medicine. Ever since Consort Nguyen was banished to the cold palace, Consort Qi regained favor and became the emperor's most favored concubine in the imperial palace. However, Lian Song thought, His Majesty's beloved concubines changed back and forth, but the most powerful one was still the empress. Because no matter how the other concubines in the imperial harem fought, in the end, only she firmly sat in the middle palace, even if she rarely came to disturb His Majesty's bedroom. Ah, Master had already warned me. How could I still think about it? I should be beaten. Lian Song hurriedly ordered herself to stop and obediently stood to the side, waiting for Consort Qi to finish feeding His Majesty the medicine and take the empty bowl. After serving His Majesty the medicine, Consort Qi took a warm handkerchief from a palace maid and wiped the medicine juice from His Majesty's mouth. After finishing a series of things, she stopped and looked at her monarch with her gentle eyes. She said with heartache, "The group of quacks in the Imperial Medical Bureau are too useless. They've treated you for so many days, but you still haven't gotten better. You've been in deep thought every day and repeatedly woke up from nightmares. It's really harmful to your dragon body. This concubine is really worried." Grabbing Consort Qi's hand and kissing it, the emperor said in a slightly tired voice, "My beloved concubine is considerate. 4 months ago, at the festival of bathing the Buddha, he looked quite energetic. But in just a few short months, his hair had turned white. The emperor was old." Consort Qi leaned into the emperor's arms. "This concubine has been thinking for a long time. Your old illness hasn't acted up for several years, but this year, it acted up again and again. It must be that slut who killed herself. Her filthy cold air collided with the auspicious purple air in the imperial harem. Therefore, this concubine thinks that it's best for us to hold a happy occasion to drive away the cold air and welcome back the purple air. Only then can the imperial harem return to its former peace. That way, perhaps your old nightmare illness will be cured." "What kind of happy occasion?" Consort Qi pretended to be careless and said, "This concubine remembers that not long ago, you were discussing the marriage of heir Xiaohou with the old concubines. Later, because of the Phoenix Terrace case, it was temporarily delayed. Now that the case is closed, why don't we understand what you mean. However, the position of the South Pacifying King has always been extremely special in this court, so the choice of the heir consort is truly not a simple matter. It needs to be carefully considered. Of course, I know about this. So 3 days ago, I specially invited the imperial astronomer to perform a divination on the marriage of heir Xiaohou. The result of the divination will come out tonight. At that time, it will be up to heaven to decide which miss is most suitable to be heir Xiaohou's wife. No one can interfere. How about your Majesty make a decision based on the result? Beloved concubine has thought it through thoroughly. Then let's follow beloved concubine's plan. This concubine thanks your Majesty for your trust. This concubine will definitely handle this matter properly and will not disappoint your Majesty." Concubine Qi bowed deeply and her heart couldn't help but overflow with uncontrollable excitement. Xiahou Qing's marriage was something that countless people in the imperial harem were scheming about. Not for anything else, but because of the powerful influence of the South Pacifying King's estate that he represented. If Zhe Yu could successfully marry into the South Pacifying King's estate as heir concubine, then her Su'er's throne would be just around the corner. So, she had been painstakingly scheming these days for the sake of the answer of heaven's will, and she believed that the final answer would not disappoint her. "Your Majesty, Niang Niang, the divination from the imperial astronomer has come out." Concubine Qi's excited voice quickly sounded in the outer hall. "This concubine will bring it for your Majesty." Concubine Qi walked over with a smile and raised her slender white hand. She picked up the small divination in the center of the large tray and flipped it to the back. In the next moment, there was a sudden clap of thunder in the sky. Concubine Qi looked at the divination in her hand and sucked in a breath. Outside the hall, the rainstorm that had been dense for a long time fell without warning. The sound of the torrential rain drowned out the sound of Qi Fei's trembling heartbeat. It also completely drowned out the sound of the talisman falling from her hand. She almost lost her voice and said, How could this be?" Her face that had been as beautiful as a flower a moment ago was now filled with shock and fear. It was as if the thickest peony in her garden had suddenly been destroyed by the torrential rain. The emperor frowned in surprise. "What is it?" That divination had coincidentally fallen by Lian Song's feet. Lian Song did his best to suppress his curiosity, ordering himself not to look. But in the end, He couldn't resist and secretly glanced at it. It was that glance that made his breathing stop. It was as if his throat was being choked and he couldn't breathe. Then his entire body couldn't help but tremble. Because on that divination was the result of the heir concubine selection. It wasn't the name of a certain family's young miss, but 8 large words, deranged and crazy, died an unnatural death. Chapter 128. A night of rain soaked the entire capital. It was such a heavy rain that it almost made people think that the entire sky would collapse and crush the 3,000 prosperous places in the world. Fortunately, in the latter half of the night, God seemed to have vented most of his inexplicable temper and the rain gradually lessened. On the morning of the second day, there was only a fine drizzle that was as light as a cow's hair. It gently fell on the pond where the lotus had already revealed its sharp edges, on the pear white heart where the peach blossoms had all fallen, and on the thick green banana leaves that had been washed by the water, rustle rustle, drip drip drip, lively and light, the most suitable for sleeping. Thus Ning Shu opened her eyes and looked out of the window. Seeing that the sky was not too late, she lazily turned over and decided to take a short nap. Ever since the previous case was closed, her nerves, which had been stretched taut for more than half a month, could finally take a breather. She gave Zi Gui and Lian Qiao each a long holiday. She even claimed that she was sick and did not go out. She hid in the Fu all day and stole half a day of leisure. Thinking of her ambition when she was reborn, to casually find someone to marry in this life and endure the curse of 17 years old, to protect her family and then be at ease to be a rich and idle person and enjoy life. Who would have thought that God did not want her to have an easy time? Not to mention the female general who jinxes her husband, the reincarnation of a heavenly fox. There was also the plum blossom kiss, this unique poison, and was even forced to be tied together with that unfathomable Xiaoho Qing. Ari, life is not easy, live and cherish it. She just moved a little when someone gently lifted the curtain and whispered, "Young miss?" It was Fu Ling. "What is the matter?" Just waking up, Ning Shu's voice sounded a little lazy and innocent. Fu Ling said, "His Highness the 6th Prince came to the residence to visit again and just asked about you." Hearing that name, Ning Shu frowned. "You said that I had caught a cold a few days ago and had not recovered and was not suitable to receive guests. But this reason has been said 3 times and His Highness the 6th Prince said he must see you today before leaving." Ning Shu had a headache as she pulled the blanket over her head and gave a long sigh before she resigned herself to her fate and got up with Fu Ling's help. In front of the Yuji Pavilion, there was a lotus pond. The lotus flowers in the pond had not yet bloomed, and only a small tip was revealed. Fortunately, there were a few weeping willows around the pond, making the pond not so lonely. It was still drizzling, the water splashing into the pond and hitting the tiles above Xiao Yuni's head, dripping down the eaves and onto the ground, making him frown in annoyance. Xiao Yuni had been waiting in the pavilion for 2 whole hours and was prepared to continue waiting. He had to see Ning Shu today. Logically speaking, he was an outsider, and it was inappropriate for him to stay here and ask to see a girl who had not yet been betrothed. However, he was really insistent, and the public house could not just kick him out of the house, so they could only send someone to serve him. Dozens of servants and maids stood around him, but no one dared to get too close to him. It was said that fresh blood was the best weapon to speed up a person's growth. Ever since the great victory over the bandits at Yangshi Mountain, where he personally sent the bloody head of the bandit leader to His Majesty, Xiao Yuni received great praise from His Majesty and was ordered to lead 30,000 Yongchengwei. No one would have thought that this down-and-out prince, who used to have frostbits all over his hands, would climb to such an enviable and surprising position at such a fast speed. And after bathing in the blood, he became colder and colder, like a sharp knife full of murderous intent. Hearing Ning Shu's footsteps, the arrogance in Xiao Yuni's eyes quickly faded and he turned around. Ning Shu did not plan to be entangled with Xiao Yuni for long today, so she casually picked a snow-white robe and put it on. Even her hair was tied up in the simplest hairstyle, and she did not use any rouge or face powder. She was like a lotus that just came out of the water, pure and elegant. But when she appeared in front of Xiao Yuni, it still made his heart tremble slightly. His Shu was already a national beauty without any face powder. If she dressed up carefully, he did not know how beautiful she would be. The funny thing was, The only time he saw her dressed up, the fiery red wedding dress she was wearing was not for him. Chapter 129. The resentment in his heart surged like a tide, and Xiao Yuni wanted to ask her, why was she avoiding him recently? How was he like a scourge that she had to avoid him? But Ning Shu was one step faster and spoke first. Crossing her hands in front of her chest, she bent her knees and bowed deeply to him. My daughter greets your highness the sixth prince. May your highness spare my daughter's life. Xiao Yuni's expression immediately changed and he frowned. What did you say? When did I ever want to hurt you, let alone take your life? He thought for a while and immediately explained, if you still mind that I deliberately stopped you that day at Third Brother's residence and almost made you reveal your flaws, I can explain it to you. That day, I was really drunk. I didn't mean it when I was drunk. I didn't know that you were investigating a case that day, so there was some misunderstanding in your heart. That's why I did what I did. It wasn't true. After that, I immediately stopped when I sobered up. But he saw Ning Shu slowly shaking her head. That's not the only thing my daughter is talking about. Don't tell me that your highness doesn't know that you have been pushing me into the abyss of death. In the drizzle, her voice was as cold as the drizzle. It seemed to be close at hand, but it seemed to be far away. Xiao Yuni frowned deeper, as if he was completely confused by her words. Shua, what do you mean by this? When did I want to put you to death? He approached her, but she retreated and distanced herself step by step, not hesitating to fall into the rain. Fu Ling saw her drenched in the rain and hurriedly raised the sky-blue oil paper umbrella, but it was brushed away by her. The fine drizzle quickly fell on her body. The rain didn't seem heavy, but it quickly soaked her face completely, slowly condensing into droplets of water that dripped down along her small, snow-white chin. Xiao Yuni's heart was filled with a trace of heartache and anger. What are you doing? If you have anything to say, then say it in the pavilion. Don't catch a cold from the rain. But she shook her head and stubbornly said, Your Highness should know. Seeing that Ning Shu was willing to let the rain wet her hair and clothes to stay away from him, Xiao Yuni clenched his fists tightly, almost squeezing out words filled with anger and resentment from between his teeth. What should I know? I only know that before you turned 15, you clearly didn't have the appearance of wanting to keep me 1,000 miles away like you do now. Don't try to fool me with some random Fail One, I don't even know her. She raised her head in the rain. The fine drizzle gradually moistened her feather-like eyelashes, making her look cold and heavy. You should know about my reputation and your status. You should know about the Empress's dissatisfaction with me and her expectations for you. You should also know that after the Phoenix Terrace case, although His Majesty didn't say it out loud, he was still afraid of me in his heart. But you still come to our Duke's mansion again and again, which is tantamount to reminding His Majesty and the Empress over and over again that there is a thorn in their side, Ning Shu. Aren't you pushing me towards the edge of the cliff step by step? Yes, the wind and rain can indeed make me catch a cold, but no matter how severe the cold is, it will only last for 30 to 50 days at most. I will be fine after taking a few medicine. But your actions are much more terrifying than the wind and rain to me. The rain outside the pavilion was like silk, and her voice was like orchids. But the sound of thunder from last night suddenly rang in Xiao Yuni's ears, causing his doubts and resentment to crumble in an instant. He was almost at a loss as to what to do. I never thought of it that way. Shua, you should know me. Ever since I made that promise to you 11 years ago, I swore to fulfill it and give you the best life. I never thought of harming you. Could it be that you really can't feel what I'm thinking? In the drizzle, Ning Shu sighed softly. Previously in the Phoenix Algae Palace, Your Highness knelt down and begged Her Majesty to spare my life for me. To be honest, I was not indifferent. But I'm afraid you don't know what Her Majesty said when she heard the palace servant report that you were kneeling outside the door and refused to get up. She said, I was still hesitating whether to kill you or not, but Yuni has always been sensible and has never dared to disobey me. You are the exception. She also said, it seems that if I don't punish you, it will be unreasonable. Your Highness, you are indeed doing everything for my good. But your actions are actually only moving yourself. Chapter 130. A sigh was like a white silk, strangling his throat, tearing Xiao Yuni's voice apart. Moved, myself. His eyes trembled deeply, several strong emotions surging in his chest at the same time, colliding and fighting, causing him to be stunned and unable to react. This Xiao Yuni did not have the high-spirited spirit he had in the imperial court, did not have the fierceness and cruelty he had when he was waving his sword. Instead, he looked a little pitiful. Ning Shu did not want to say it like this, but he was so stubborn that she had no choice but to use the strong medicine. Right now, I am in a sea of fire, and the only thing I can rely on to survive is the thin rope above the sea of fire. Your Highness's closeness to me is like a knife that wants to kill me. As long as your Highness gets closer to me, the blade of the knife will get closer to the rope under my feet. If you force yourself to approach, the blade will mercilessly cut off the rope, causing me to fall into the raging flames, allowing the flames to lick my skin and burn my flesh and internal organs. In the end, my entire body will be turned into charcoal, and I will die without a complete corpse. So, if your Highness wants me to live, please stay further away from me, even further away. This way, I won't let down the shallow friendship I had when I was 5 years old, when I boldly spoke up for your Highness. With that, she turned to leave. But she heard a gust of wind and her hand was grabbed by someone, pulling her back into the pavilion. Beside her, Fu Ling and the others were shocked and wanted to stop him. But Xiao Yuni's actions were too fast and too fierce. Ning Shu was caught off guard and her back was pressed against the pillar of the pavilion. She was forced to look up and meet Xiao Yuni's burning eyes. Do you think that I abandoned my mother and wanted to fight for that position entirely for myself? Xiao Yuni gritted his teeth and asked in a suppressed and painful voice by her ear. His chest rose and fell violently. His eyes, which clearly reflected her figure, were bloodshot with anger. After so many years, I still remember that year when I knelt in front of Imperial Concubine Chi's palace. There were so many people coming and going in the palace, one by one, walked in front of me, but no one stood up for me. Even my biological mother, Yin Jiaoyi, only dared to use a handkerchief to wipe her tears after hearing about it. She quietly said to me, "Mother is useless, unable to protect you." Then, when Consort Chi Sedan arrived, she hurriedly knelt down to pay her respects, not daring to say a single word for me. He took a deep breath, as if he was immersed in the memories that were half bright and half dark. There was only a little you. You blinked your big, innocent eyes and looked at me for a long time. Then, you jumped down from your mother's knee and stood in front of me. But after you helped me clear my name, you were almost charged with the crime of disrespect by Imperial Concubine Chi. Do you know what I was thinking at that time? What I was thinking was, not only is my mother incompetent, I am also incompetent. In this world, there is only one person who dares to stand up for me, but will be punished because of me. I am simply too incompetent. On that day, I swore in my heart that I would never let this happen again. One day in the future, I will definitely protect you behind me. In this world, there are millions of people, no matter if it is a person or a beast, a god or a ghost in hell, no one will be able to hurt you. But you actually said that I was only moved by myself. His eyes were completely red. Every time he looked at her, every time he looked into her eyes, it was like burning charcoal. In both her previous and current lives, this was the first time he had said these words from the bottom of his heart to her. The deep affection in those words made her unable to control her shock and fear. It was as if he really, deeply placed her in the bottom of his heart. If she had not experienced the pain of that life, perhaps she really would have believed it. Unfortunately. Your Highness, what you mean is that you fought with all your might for me. After a short silence, Ning Shu took a light breath. When she looked up again, her eyes had regained their clarity. Then may I ask your Highness, if I ask you to stop and turn back now, to be an idle prince, like His Highness Prince Ku, to spend all day reciting the wind, drinking wine, drawing eyebrows and putting on concubine's makeup, not caring about court affairs, and only enjoying life, would you be willing? Xiao Yuni said excitedly, "How do you know, I'm not?" The word "I'm willing" almost slipped out of his mouth, but when this short word reached his mouth, it was like a hard stone had suddenly appeared and firmly blocked his mouth, making him unable to make a sound. In this short moment of hesitation, Ning Shu had the chance to withdraw her wrist. She took 3 steps back and smiled faintly at him. It seems like you and I both have an answer. Chapter 131. It was a thin layer of paper with the world's most exquisite patterns drawn on it. It was almost mesmerizing, but Ning Shu broke it with a light poke. The wind and snow hidden behind the paper window slapped Xiao Yuni mercilessly like a slap on his face, causing his face to turn pale and full of embarrassment. He was at a loss for what to do. No, mixed emotions filled his chest, making him feel embarrassed, introspective and conflicted. He had always thought that he fought for that throne with all his might for Ning Shu. But why was it that when Ning Shu asked him to give up, those two simple words, he could not say it out loud? By his ear, Ning Shu's voice was like a gust of wind that could not be any lighter, blowing into his ears through the clouds, the sea of flowers, and the misty snowy peaks. Your Highness, you thought that everything you did was to help me, but in reality, it was to help the powerless you back then. The fog in front of him dispersed and Xiao Yuni's eyebrows trembled. The word hypocrite drilled into his mind cruelly and straightforwardly, sentencing himself to death. So it was like this. No. He really had her in his heart. It wasn't all for himself. But more thoughts surged into his mind. If he really gave up for her, then what was all the humiliation he had suffered since he was young? What was it when he abandoned his mother 11 years ago and was looked down upon and despised by others? What was it when he endured and hid like a wolf all these years, preparing and plotting? Was it all in vain? No, it was impossible. All these thoughts merged together and turned into a dark flame burning in his heart. He gritted his teeth and looked at Ning Shu in pain. Shu-er, why do you have to force me to make a choice? Can't I? Do I want both? 5 words were about to come out, but in the end, they were stuck in his mouth, unable to leave his mouth. Because now that everything had been exposed by Ning Shu, he knew clearly that it was impossible. If he insisted on having her, then he would definitely make his royal father and royal mother unhappy. The result would either be her death, or he would be completely thrown out of that stairway. If he insisted on having the throne, then like what she said just now, every step he took now was the knife that would kill her. Unless she was willing to be a sparrow raised in a golden cage by him, obediently hiding in the cage, silently enduring all the malice in the world, not fighting, not arguing, and not making a fuss. Silently enduring and enduring. Until he ascended to the supreme throne, he would then wash away all the grievances and injustice for her. But stop joking. If she had such a mediocre and cowardly personality, she wouldn't have stood up for him 11 years ago when she was only 5 years old. Then, there would be no possibility of them even knowing each other. There was no way to get the best of both worlds, not letting down Buddha and not letting down Qing. In the end, it was an extravagant hope with no way out. Looking at Xiao Yuni who was completely lost, Ning Shu couldn't help but think of the last moment of that life, when they met with swords and spears at the city gates. She was guarding the high city gates and looking down. He was on the war horse that was attacking the city, holding the blood-stained emperor's sword in his hand. His red eyes looked at her in confusion as he asked softly, "Why did we become like this?" A feeling of pain that she hadn't felt for a long time secretly slipped out, making her sigh helplessly. Look, why bother? Walking the same path again, was her head kicked by a donkey? This 300-year-old ghost, wouldn't he become the laughingstock of the entire underworld when he returned? Shu-er, wait a minute, I will definitely think of a way. The intense conflict made his voice hoarse. He hurriedly reached out to pull her back and defend himself. But she heard a servant suddenly jogging over to report, "Eldest miss, the Lord Pacifying Manor has sent you a letter, asking for your help." Chapter 132. His words made Ning Shu feel like she had been pardoned. She heaved a sigh of relief in her heart and immediately turned to take the invitation from the servant, before she bowed politely to Xiao Yuni. "I have other matters to attend to now, so please forgive me for taking my leave first." When she brushed past Xiao Yuni, Ning Shu's footsteps paused slightly. "Your Highness risked your life and went into battle. It wasn't easy for you to get to your current position after killing those bandits in Flame Breath Mountain. It wasn't easy for you to get to your current position. I sincerely pray that your Highness's wish will come true and you will be able to ascend the throne." She didn't know how much of his words were true and how much of it was false. Even if it was only a little, she was willing to sincerely pray for him. As for the rest, the eagle soared into the sky, the fish soared to the bottom, and the bridge went their own way. This was supposed to be the best ending for them in this life. The rain had quietly stopped and her snow-white dress rippled along with her footsteps. It was as if she was walking on snow and couldn't be chased. Looking at her slim back as she walked out of his sight, Xiao Yuni was in a trance. After a long time, he clenched his fists until the veins on the back of his hand were exposed. Then he softly and aggressively said his lifelong obsession. You said that I'm harming you by getting close to you. Then why do you keep getting close to Xiahou Qing? Won't he harm you? In the end, it's just an excuse for you to reject me. Shu since you sincerely pray for me, then I want both you and the world. Even if there is no path, I will use the sword in my hand and the bone in my finger to carve out a path. Even if I break your wings. In this life, you can only grow old with me. Others can only dream about it. Outside Duke Ning. Master, the invitation has been sent in. Ju Sai finished his work and opened the curtain, reporting respectfully to the young master inside. Xia Hu nodded and replied, then, he coughed softly. Hui Mo, who was beside him, immediately acted as if he was facing a great enemy. He took out a green porcelain bottle and poured out a pill. Master, please take the medicine. The cool breeze in the middle of the night in April might not mean anything to other people, but his master had been ill for many years and couldn't bear even the slightest breeze. That day, after Lady Ning fell into the water, the prince gave her a cloak. After returning to the prince's residence, his coughing relapsed. Lady Ning had been sick for 3 days, but his Shizi Yi had been sick until now. A few days ago, when he went to Phoenix Terrace to examine Consort Wen's corpse, he forced himself to endure the pain. Instead, his coughing became worse, and that night, he spat out a mouthful of blood. After lying in bed for a few more days, he felt better today. So when he heard him cough again, Hui Mo immediately became alert. He wanted to wrap his master up with the most precious thing in the world. Hui Mo endured it and finally couldn't help but complain in a low voice, Your Highness, you can't do that again next time. It's not like His Highness didn't know his own body. He really didn't cherish it at all. After taking the medicine, he put the teacup in his hand into his mouth and took a sip. Then he slowly put it down. Under the black fox fur, Xiahou Qing's skin became more and more pale like snow. It doesn't matter. This body is just a matter of a few days earlier or later. Why take it to heart? His cold self-mockery made Hui Mo's heart ache, but he also knew that it was the truth. He only hated himself for being incompetent. He had learned so many poison and medical books in vain, but he still didn't have the ability to cure the plum blossom kiss and save His Highness's life. Why was he called Hui Mo? He should be called Trash. Hui Mo's mood couldn't help but become depressed. Chapter 133. I think that since Mr. Cloud Leaf can come back from the dead, there must be a way to cure the poison. Although we can't solve it for the time being, with the help of a smart person like Lady Ning, I believe that we can solve the mystery of the plum blossom kiss smoothly. By then, you will be able to recover as before. Ju Sai gently pulled Hui Mo and motioned him to look out of the window. Hui Mo was a young man after all. His attention was immediately diverted and he looked out of the window. Soon, he caught a glimpse of light and immediately said, Master, Lady Ning is here. Just now, the snow-white cloak was stained with rain. Ning Shu hurriedly went back to change and rushed out. She didn't even have time to dry her hair. At this time, there was still some moisture in her hair, which made her hair darker. Her face was as white as snow and her lips were as red as vermilion. She was particularly agile. Hearing the sound of Ning Shu's footsteps, Xiahou Qing said, slowly, a vague figure was outlined in his mind. The figure should be just at the height of his chin. That night, he threw the cloak to her to wrap around her body. She seemed to be holding it tightly and slowly. Step by step, she walked carefully so that the cloak would not fall to the ground. She should also have a pair of very clever eyes. Every time she came up with a clever idea in her mind, a bright light would flow out from her eyes. She looked as delicate as an orchid, but there was an unimaginable tenacity hidden in her eyes. Even if she was in a sea of fire, or under the questioning eyes of 300,000 people, she had never been afraid. Other than that, he knew nothing, but he seemed to know a lot of things unconsciously. Ning Shu, who was being painted by him in his mind, stepped out of the gate of the Duke's mansion. Her eyes quickly found the familiar figure in the black fox fur coat in the carriage and smiled slightly. "Greetings, Your Highness. May I know why Your Highness is looking for my daughter today?" She didn't waste time to be polite and asked directly. She knew that unless there was something urgent, Xiahou Qing wouldn't have sent her an invitation without notifying her in advance. Hearing her voice, the brush and ink in Xiahou Qing's mind suddenly stopped and dissipated like smoke. Separated by the black brocade in front of him, he looked in her direction and casually waved his hand. "Last time, I heard that you were very interested in my concubine selection. Today, I will satisfy you. Let's get in the car." "Ah!" This sentence made Ning Shu reveal an extremely startled expression. She thought it was something urgent, but she didn't expect it to be this. "However, His Highness has already decided on the heir consort." So fast. As far as she knew, the higher the rank of Marquis in the manor, the more etiquette they had to go through when it came to marriage. It wasn't uncommon to spend a year or so just to arrange the marriage, not to mention the large amount of red tape and other formalities that followed. If there was even the slightest mistake, it wasn't impossible to start all over again. It had only been a few days since their last chat, and he had already decided. Her mind was filled with shock, but he was still as calm as before. He fiddled with the bone in his hand that had long been flattened and knocked on the table. "It hasn't been decided yet, but it will be soon. Today, I am waiting for you to choose one for me." The previous sentence made Ning Shu startled, and this sentence made Ning Shu completely dumbfounded. "I will choose." Ning Shu almost thought that she had misheard. "Your Highness isn't joking, right?" This joke was so big that it wasn't funny at all. But she saw Xiahou Qing's lips curl up slightly, as if he was talking about someone else's matter, and it had nothing to do with him. He said casually, "Why not?" Chapter 134. Ning Shu's eyebrows moved slightly and she said, "There are millions of women in this world. There are plump swallows and thin rings, weak willows swaying in the wind, passionate and talented women, elegant and graceful. I don't know what kind of woman Your Highness likes. If I randomly choose someone that Your Highness is not satisfied with, I'm afraid that I won't be able to bear the consequences. Therefore, I ask Your Highness to find someone else." Xiahou Qing said without restraint, "Don't worry. No matter who you choose, it doesn't make any difference to me. I don't need to worry about blaming you." Ning Shu hesitated and said, "Then what if I choose the most generous and fat of all the young ladies, with an appearance that is like salt, without talent and without interest?" Xiahou Qing continued to be calm. "It doesn't matter. If she has no talent and no virtue, likes to indulge in flights of fancy, and does all kinds of mischief all day, Your Highness won't mind." Xiahou Qing's expression was still calm. "It doesn't matter." Ning Shu smiled. He clearly chose the person she would spend all day with. If it was someone else, their heart would be filled with eagerness. He, on the other hand, didn't look like he was choosing a concubine. Instead, he looked like he was casually choosing a painting to hang on the wall. Therefore, she casually said, "What if it's someone like me, who has a bad luck in her life?" She thought that he would continue to maintain his cold and silent appearance. She didn't expect him to frown, as if he was extremely disgusted. Then, he spat out 4 solemn words from his lips and teeth. "Impossible." Ning Shu froze for a moment, then she smiled awkwardly and said, "Your Highness, don't worry. I was just joking." In the palace, the young ladies carefully selected by His Majesty, the Empress, and the Grand Imperial concubine must be of good character and appearance. How could there be someone like me who has a bad luck? TSK, she knew that her good reputation was spread far and wide, and no one would welcome her if she married into any family. However, they were friends who had solved the same case, so he should at least give her some face. If he didn't give her any face, it would be too embarrassing. Upon hearing her words, Xiahou Qing's frown deepened. He pursed his lips and wanted to say something, but he didn't know how to respond. At the side, Juicy hurriedly said, "Lady Ning, please don't misunderstand. My family's heir doesn't mean to be disrespectful. Instead, he thought for a moment, but didn't know how to phrase it. In the end, he pushed the brocade box on the table in front of Ning Shu and said respectfully in a low voice, "Lady Ning will understand after you see it." The black brocade box was pushed in front of her. Ning Shu glanced at Ju Sai's tense face. Immediately, her joking expression changed. She picked up the brocade box and slowly opened it. Then, she saw the small and exquisite token. She was caught off guard and her eyes widened. "This is," Xiahou Qing's low voice slowly sounded in her ear. "Last night, the imperial astronomer obeyed imperial concubine Chi's orders and performed a divination for me to choose a consort. In the end, which family's young miss was the best choice for the heir's consort, the result of the divination was not the birth characters of any family, nor was it the family name. Instead, it was the curse of these 8 characters that flew out of nowhere: madness, and violent death. Can you guess what this token means? My heir's consort hasn't been chosen yet, but her fate has already been decided. Tell me, who should I choose?" There was a hint of a smile in his voice, but it was the kind that was exceptionally cold. What was dozens of times colder than his voice was the shocking red characters in front of Ning Shu. Each character seemed to have been carefully drawn with every stroke, so thick that it seemed like it would drip blood. How is this possible? Ning Shu's beautiful brows tightly knit together, and she immediately raised her doubts. First, since the imperial astronomer obeyed imperial concubine Chi's orders to perform a divination, it must have recorded the names and corresponding birth dates of all the young misses to be chosen. It must be checked over and over again before it can be thrown into the divination pot. How could such an ominous piece of paper be mixed in with the rest? Second, His Highness's consort selection is a major event, so it's impossible for only one person to be present to perform the divination. At the very least, the supervisor, junior supervisor, magistrate, and more than 10 other people should be there to assist. The process of making the tokens, making a vow, inquiring about the heavens, throwing the tokens, and so on, has to be done in groups of 2 or 3. Each group is responsible for one step, not interfering with each other and supervising each other. Even if that ominous token was lucky enough to be mixed in, how could it be guaranteed that it would be chosen in the next step by chance? Third, perhaps the person who was a ghost specifically aimed at the last step of the token throwing and took the opportunity to replace the one that was truly chosen. But how did he escape the eyes of the people next to him? Moreover, the probability of being found to be a fraud in the last step is too high. There are only 2 or 3 suspects, and after this matter is revealed, these people will bear the brunt of the interrogation. How could he be so sure that he wouldn't be found? Or is it that he doesn't want to live anymore? She understood at the same time. So when he said impossible, it wasn't that he looked down on her, but that he would never let her be chosen and fall into that treacherous and terrifying situation. Chapter 135. That's right. Such an almost impossible thing happened, but it did. It happened right under His Majesty's nose. How inconceivable. Xiahou Qing slowly said, His Majesty ordered all 30 people in the Imperial Astronomer to be arrested and interrogated overnight. They didn't get any useful information and didn't find any clues. Currently, he could only order for this matter to be sealed. No one is allowed to leak it to the outside world. And you are the only person I told. For such a small piece of paper, the Ministry of Justice's most experienced torture experts were sent out, but they didn't find any suspicious points. It was simply ridiculous. It seems that after arranging my marriage, that person has extended his hands to Your Highness. It's just that the fate of going mad and dying an unnatural death is a little too cruel. Ning Shu couldn't help but sigh. She thought for a moment and said, then could it be that the piece of paper was swapped on the way from the Imperial Astronomer to Fu Ning Palace? Logically speaking, after the Imperial Astronomer divined a heavenly secret, it shouldn't be spied on in advance. It should be immediately sealed and presented to the Emperor before being made public. Therefore, it was very possible that it was swapped on the way. After the piece of paper was divined, it was sealed in a brocade box and locked. It was escorted into the palace by 8 eunuchs. The lock was divided into 2 halves, with 2 stewards each holding one half. When it reached Fu Ning Palace, the 2 of them opened it at the same time. Then, under everyone's eyes, it was placed on a tray and presented to His Majesty and Consort Ning. Being a ghost under the eyes of so many people is much harder than being an imperial astronomer. The only possibility is that these 8 people conspired together. But do you know who these 8 eunuchs are? Xiahou Qing's finger lightly tapped on the brocade box, a mocking smile on his face. Consort Qi's trusted aides. Ning Shu understood after thinking about it. She had long known that Qi Zhanyu had admired Xiahou Qing for a long time, and as a blood relative, Consort Qi, in order to fulfill her most beloved niece, and in order to use this marriage to draw the South pacifying manner to her side, increasing the bargaining chip for her son Xiao Yansu to seize the throne, she would never allow this matter to go wrong. Therefore, even if the piece of paper was swapped, the original person could only be Qi Zhuanyu's piece of paper. And definitely not this one. However, such a mysterious thing had happened. It was so unpredictable and treacherous. After thinking it through, Ning Shu was inwardly speechless. This matter has escaped the attention of so many pairs of eyes and 7 orifices people. It seems like it was done flawlessly. They must have put in a lot of effort. However, I still have some doubts about this matter. Is Your Highness the target of this matter, or? She stretched out her slender fingers and slowly wrote a word on the small table in front of her. Qi? Although this matter revolves around Your Highness's marriage, Imperial concubine Qi is also inexplicably involved. Her purpose is clear as day. She wants to betroth her niece, Qi Jueyu, to Your Highness. So I'm thinking, could there be another possibility? Someone was dissatisfied with Imperial concubine Qi's domineering behavior and didn't want this matter to be as simple as she wanted it to be, so she set up a trap to make things go contrary to her wishes? Xiahou Qing laughed. He had always been an indifferent person. Even if he laughed, it was mostly a mocking smile, a smile that wasn't a smile. It was enough to slightly raise the corner of his mouth. At this moment, he unexpectedly revealed such a clear smile. It was like the spring breeze blowing on a pool of spring water, causing people's minds to involuntarily sway. Yes, I also want to know which one it is, he said. Since the rain quietly stopped, the curtain of clouds gradually dispersed, and the treasured mirror became clear. The first ray of light poured out from the curtain of clouds, sprinkling down from the horizon, and penetrating through the window, scattering diagonally on the side of his face. Half of it was light, half of it was dark. And that line of light and darkness fell on his smiling lips at this moment. After a short pause, Ning Shu moved her gaze away from that line of light and darkness, and continued, So, Your Highness' idea is to immediately choose a concubine. Chapter 136. Yes, Xiahou Qing's tone was unusually light. This matter only happened last night. After I received His Majesty's summons, I had no choice but to rush to the palace in the rain. Naturally, I had to catch the other party off guard in the shortest amount of time. From last night until now, it has only been 10 hours. I want to see how the other party can set up 2 flawless puzzles in such a short amount of time. Other than that, I can also test who the other party's true target is. Ning Shu was silent. Why did she feel that compared to the curse on his future Shizi Fei, he cared more about rushing into the palace in the rain in the middle of the night? Of course, she didn't dare to say this in front of him. She could only offer a smiling face and flatter him. Your Highness is wise. This little girl admires you. She thought for a moment and then said, But since Your Highness already has a plan in mind, why do you need this little girl to help you choose a consort and waste time? Can't Your Highness solve this matter yourself? He lightly waved his hand and ordered Ju Sai to drive the carriage. Then he leaned against the brocade cushion to rest, using his hand to support his head. I'm tired. Compared to working myself, I prefer to see others share my burdens. What, you're not willing? I'm willing, very willing. It's good that you're willing. Xiahou Qing curved his lips and threw over the eunuch robe that he had prepared earlier. The one from last time was ruined in the secret passageway in the Sea of Fire. I ordered someone to make another one. I invited the best tailor and embroiderer in the capital. The price should be equal to half of the total cost of solving the last case. His meaning was very simple. Previously at the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Tower, she had shamelessly proposed to split the cost of solving the case between them. He had gladly accepted, but the way he put it into practice made Ning Shu's heart bleed like a river. Thus, Ning Shu endured the pain in her heart and wore the most expensive eunuch robe in the capital. She followed Xiahou Qing into Weiyang Palace in the imperial city to participate in the selection process for the Shizi Fei. The sky had long since cleared up, and the jade-colored glazed tiles appeared even more magnificent and dazzling after being washed. Only the wet marks left on the vermilion walls of the palace and the lotus pond that had silently risen by half an inch reminded them that this place had just endured a terrible storm last night. Many of the begonia flowers in the palace had been hit by the wind and rain, their petals had fallen, and they quietly drifted away with the water. Clusters of Taiping flowers quietly sprouted their pistils, and the red snow in the courtyard was as gorgeous as the sunset. It was said that this flower was the previous emperor's favorite flower. During his 30-odd years on the throne, his favorite word was peace. Unfortunately, when he died, it was the most chaotic time in the history of the dynasty. Seeing this flower suddenly bloom today, he really didn't know if this was a good sign or a bad one. Of course, Ning Shu only dared to think these words in her heart. She didn't dare to say it out loud. Because this was the imperial palace, the most magnificent and vast place in the world, but also the place where conspiracies flourished. Before he even stepped into the Weiyang Palace, he could already hear the commotion inside. Ning Shu smiled and said, "It seems that your highness's charm is indeed extraordinary. Only half of the nobles in the city are left. The remaining ones who didn't come are probably those whose families haven't reached the right age. Although your highness can't see, it's better to go in and listen through the curtains. It's said that the voice is delicate and the body is soft. A pleasant voice can make one's whole body go limp and numb, even if one's appearance is average." Xiahou Qing coldly sneered, "Ah, it seems that you're quite an expert. Don't forget why you're here today. I don't seem to have invited you to admire the beauty and chat." His black cloak was lifted by the wind, and he had already stepped into the side hall. Chapter 137. Consort Qi was supposed to be in charge of today's heir consort selection, but what happened last night was indeed too strange. His Majesty was not at ease and ordered the Empress to do the same. In the front hall, most of the noble young ladies from each manor had already arrived. Each of them sat on the banquet table with a heart like a rabbit, waiting for this so-called Taiping banquet, which was actually the beginning of the consort selection ceremony. Today, they all dressed up their most beautiful side. On one hand, they pretended to chat and joke with the young ladies next to them. On the other hand, they couldn't help but quietly look shyly and timidly at the huge screen that separated the front hall from the front hall. They only hoped that the handsome and outstanding heir Xiahou would leisurely walk out from behind the screen and softly call out his name. Ning Shu didn't know how nervous and expectant these young ladies were. Ning Shu saw with her own eyes how leisurely and comfortable His Highness was until the palace maid came over and said, "Everyone is here. His Highness, please choose by yourself." Xiahou Qing put down the teacup in his hand and leisurely stood up. He ordered Ning Shu to support him and walked to the front of the screen. The screen was very exquisite. It was a hollow style with a roll of spring snow-melting red plum blossoms pasted on it. Looking from the front hall to the back, one could only vaguely see a rough outline. But looking from the back to the front, one could clearly see the situation in the front hall through the layer of exquisite carvings and paper. Xiahou Qing said, "Which noble young ladies came today? Read out their names to me." Across the screen, Ning Shu looked at the 20 or so young ladies who were like blooming flower buds with rosy cheeks and read out their names one by one. Until she saw Consort Qi and Consort Qi sitting on the east side. She paused and then said in a low voice, "Consort Qi is also here." Although His Majesty had ordered for the strange curse last night to be sealed, Consort Qi, who had witnessed it with her own eyes, must have a way to secretly pass the news to her closest niece, Consort Qi. If ordinary people knew about such a terrible curse, they would definitely hesitate. Unexpectedly, Qi Juanyu still came today. She was dressed in an embroidered robe and had the most exquisite makeup on her face. She arrogantly raised her chin and leaned against Consort Chi's side, disdaining to chat with any of the other noble young ladies present, as if she had already decided that the southern pacifying prince's heir consort was already in her bag. It was just that the light green hair under her eyes that was not completely covered showed that she had been hesitating and unable to sleep last night. Ning-Shu really didn't know whether to praise her for being so affectionate that she didn't care about life and death, or to sigh that she didn't know the difference between life and death, which was admirable. Just as Ning-Shu was reading out the names of all the young ladies present to Xiahou Qing, Empress Cao smiled as she swept her gaze over the crowd. Then, she said amiably, "Since we're all here, let's begin the banquet. This empress has specially ordered people to pick the Taiping flowers that have just bloomed today. Let's admire the flowers as we eat. There's no need to be reserved. Just treat it as a small gathering with the elders and Jinlan." Empress Cao lightly waved her hand, indicating for the palace servants to start the banquet. At the entrance of the hall, a beautiful figure dressed in light yellow imperial robes suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes, supporting someone as they stepped over the threshold. Everyone looked over and saw an unexpected person, the 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping. Everyone knew that the marriage of an imperial princess had always been decided by His Majesty, the Empress, or the Empress Dowager. There had never been a reason for them to be chosen together with the other noble young ladies. Wasn't she lowering her status by appearing here? Facing everyone's surprised, doubtful, or contemptuous gazes, Xiao Zhongping's eyes flashed with a trace of evasiveness. However, when old Princess Consort Yu gently patted her hand to comfort her, she found the courage she had been preparing for a long time. She straightened her back and brought out her pride as an imperial princess. Facing Empress Cao, she said, "Mother, please wait a moment. Mother, please wait a moment. I'm still missing." Putting down the wine cup in her hand, Empress Cao's eyes revealed disapproval. She frowned slightly and said, "Zhongping, don't cause trouble." Chapter 138. The current emperor had a total of 8 princes and 6 princesses. It was hard to say who His Majesty favored the most. However, if one were to ask who His Majesty did not favor, it would be 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping. There was no other reason than Xiao Zhongping's birth was an accident after His Majesty drank. Her birth mother was a lowly palace maid in the inner servants' bureau. His Majesty met her by chance during a palace banquet after getting drunk. When he sobered up, he found that this palace maid was very ordinary and boring. His Majesty was very disappointed and did not plan to take her as a concubine. However, this palace maid was very capable and became pregnant with a dragon seed after one night. She then gave birth to 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping. However, this palace maid was unlucky and died of an epidemic a few years later. Until her death, she was only a 5th-ranked talent. Her birth mother was not favored, so the 13th princess grew up like heir. It wasn't until 6 years ago, when old Prince Yu passed away due to illness, that Prince Yu's household had withered. Old Princess Consort Yu deeply felt that she was lonely, so she begged the emperor and the empress to choose the unattended 13th princess to accompany her. His Majesty, on account of his old relationship with the old prince, happily agreed. Since then, the unknown 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping had a little support. Hearing the reprimand in Cao Hu's words, Xiao Zhongping's face paled and she bit her lips. Previously, she had asked old Princess Consort Yu to put in a good word for her in front of Imperial Mother, but she had been softly rejected time and time again. It wasn't that she didn't know that Imperial Mother wasn't willing to stand up for her. She had also heard that Southern Yang had sent an envoy to ask for the princess's hand in marriage to tie the knot between the two countries. Thus, today was her last chance. She had to come, otherwise she was afraid that she would regret it for the rest of her life. Before Xiao Zhongping could think of a suitable response, Qi Zhaoyu, who was beside Consort Qi, stood up. "Your Highness, this humble girl boldly asks, 13th princess is a princess. How can she be chosen with us? This does not seem to be reasonable, right?" He then turned to look at Xiao Zhongping and sneered, "Your Highness, it's fine if you don't care about your dignity, but if you drag His Majesty and Her Highness down with you, it will be a great sin. It would be fine if the Empress reprimanded her, But she, Qi Jueyu, dared to ridicule her in front of so many people. Xiao Zhongping was infuriated, but he also said, "Fourth young lady Qi, if that's the case, an inauspicious person like you shouldn't appear here. Aren't you afraid of offending Imperial Mother and His Highness the Crown Prince? I'm afraid you can't bear the consequences." Qi Jueyu frowned. "How am I not clear?" Xiao Zhongping sneered. "The case of your fourth young lady being haunted by a demonic wolf has already spread to more than half of the capital. Your father has invited countless Taoist masters to exorcise the demonic spirit in the mansion, but they still haven't been completely exorcised. Don't tell me this isn't ominous. Her body is inauspicious, yet she still covets the position of heir consort. Does fourth young lady Qi wish to bring this misfortune into the Lord-pacifying manner? What nonsense are you talking about? It's just that someone pranked me by leaving a few paw prints in my room to scare me. How could I be haunted by a demonic wolf? My birth date and horoscope were determined by the imperial astronomer. As for the so-called demonic wolf, I'm wondering if someone didn't want me to be chosen as the heir consort, so they deliberately tried to scare me and ruin my marriage with His Highness the Crown Prince. Your Highness, you said that this person's ability is so great that it's not something an ordinary person can do. Who do you think it is? What do you mean by your words? You've committed a taboo and provoked a demon to cause mischief. Instead of reflecting on yourself, you're thinking of framing others. What a good upbringing. She watched as an imperial daughter and consort Qi's niece, the two most distinguished girls in the room, were about to quarrel in front of so many people. Ning Shu watched from behind the screen with great interest. Neither of these two were easy to deal with. Moreover, both of them were determined to win the position of heir consort. No matter which one it was hard to endure the luck of love. She quietly glanced to the side and looked at Xiahou Qing, expressing her deep sympathy for His Highness the Crown Prince. As if he sensed Ning Shu's gloating gaze, Xiahou Qing coldly let out a hair from the bottom of his throat. With a light flick of his finger, a small bead flew out from between his fingers. Feeling her waist go numb, Ning Shu immediately couldn't laugh because her legs immediately went limp and weak. She dangerously grabbed onto something to prevent herself from falling. But before she could rejoice, she turned her head and found that the thing she was holding onto wasn't anything else but Xiahou Qing. Chapter 139. Her waist was sore and her legs were numb. She couldn't stand properly and hurriedly grabbed onto something. Only now did she realize that she was holding onto Xiahou Qing's shoulder with one hand and his belt with the other. Her entire upper body was pressed tightly against his chest. There wasn't an inch of distance between them. Her slightly hot cheeks could almost count the steady heartbeat in his chest. After a short moment of shock, it was followed by awkwardness. An indescribable awkwardness mixed with a trace of inexplicable panic. She immediately pulled back her hand in a fluster and steadied herself by holding onto the heavy screen in front of her. Then she smiled apologetically at him and wanted to say, "I'm really sorry. My daughter was careless and offended Your Highness." She also wanted to say, "My daughter didn't do it on purpose. It was Your Highness' fault." She also wanted to tease, "Your Highness, I see that these two are infatuated with you. Their backgrounds aren't low and their appearances are as beautiful as flowers. You won't make a mistake in choosing either one." But in the end, she didn't say a word. She pressed her fingertips against the auspicious patterns carved on the screen. She turned her head and continued to watch the situation in the front hall. Beside her, Xiahou Qing was also silent. He silently listened to the sounds in front of him. After a long time, he raised his hand and brushed the shoulder that Ning Shu had just held onto. Then he pinched it, as if he was pinching a flower that had quietly landed on his shoulder. The front hall knew nothing about what happened behind the screen. Xiao Zhongping and Qi Jueyu were still bickering until Cao Hu couldn't listen anymore and frowned. On the side, old Prince Yu coughed lightly and smiled at the Empress. "Nyang Nyang, look. These children are still children in the end. They're bickering with just a few words. They're really lively and cute. How about this, since you're all here today, if you leave now, it'll be criticized. Why don't you all stay? As for who Nanping Wang's heir chooses, it'll depend on your luck. Consort Qi Nyang Nyang, what do you say?" Consort Chi's expression was already extremely unhappy. Previously, when she was in charge of the heir consort selection, no one dared to mention that Chi Zhenyu was haunted by the demon wolf. But now, she shared the same reasoning as the Empress. If she wanted to investigate further, Chi Zhenyu indeed did not meet the requirements to participate in the selection. So, no matter how unhappy she was, she could only nod and smile coldly. Then little 13th will stay and chat with me for a while. Just treat it as playing. Empress Cao said, if that's the case, then so be it. Empress Cao did not have any children, so there was no legitimate princess who could marry into the Nanping Wang estate. Her Cao family also did not have a young lady of the right age who met the requirements for the heir consort selection. Thus, Empress Cao did not intend to get involved in this matter. However, although the final flower did not fall into her family's hands, if that flower brushed past Imperial concubine Qi, she would be happy to see it happen. Between the 13th princess and Qi Zhuanyu, she preferred the former. Moreover, old Princess Consort Yu had made a special appearance today, so she was naturally willing to give her some face. Xiao Zhongping and Qi Zhuanyu sat opposite each other and coldly glanced at each other. The banquet officially began. Under the cover of the music, Ning Shu said in a low voice, "Now, the 24 young ladies have all arrived. Today, the Empress, Imperial Concubine Qi, Old Concubine Yu, and Old Concubine Shen and Old Concubine Shu are accompanying them. In the entire palace, other than them, there are 42 palace maids, 56 eunuchs, 12 performers, and guards standing guard outside the hall. Your Highness, you can begin the selection of the heir consort." There were 139 people in the entire palace. If someone wanted to play tricks, it would definitely be one of these people. However, how should the 24 young ladies be chosen to catch the ghost hiding behind them? Xiahou Qing looked at her and said calmly, "What do you think?" Ning Shu slightly frowned and went through the situation again in her mind. Finally, she said 2 words, "Draw lots." Hearing this, Xiahou Qing slightly raised the corner of his mouth into a faint smile. Then, he waved his hand and Hui Mo immediately took out a brocade box that had been prepared earlier. When he opened it, there was a thick stack of paper inside. The rest of the paper was blank except for a line of words written on one of the papers, "1,000 trees blooming in the east wind night." The brush and ink were elegant and natural like a dragon. Hui Mo didn't need to be told. He folded the paper into the same size and sealed it in another stack of prepared envelopes. Ning Shu saw this and raised her eyebrows. It seemed that great minds think alike. Chapter 140. There were a total of 24 ladies present, and each of them had a huge variable. Instead of randomly choosing one, it was better to use the strategy of drawing lots to completely muddy the pool of hidden mystery. If the other party had an accurate target, they would definitely take action during the drawing of lots. If not, then it would depend on the final result. Hui Mo quickly packed the 24 letters, sealed them with wax, put them back into the brocade box, and handed it to Ning Shu. "Go ahead," Xiahou Qing said. Ning Shu nodded, bent over and put the brocade box on top of her head, twisted her body and slowly walked out from behind the screen. Everyone at the banquet seemed to be enjoying the flowers, but in fact, many people's eyes quietly fell on the screen. When Ning Shu appeared, she immediately attracted everyone's attention. Cao Hu raised his head and glanced at the crowd. He said gracefully, "Have you made your decision, Heir Xiahou?" Ning Shu cupped her fists and bowed. She lowered her voice and said, reporting to the Empress, "My family's Shiziyi said that all of you ladies are virtuous ladies from famous families, and each of you has your own outstanding points. As the saying goes, flowers in disorder gradually confuse people's eyes." He really didn't know how to make a choice to live up to everyone's misplaced love. Thus, he decided to leave this matter to the heavens. "There are 24 letters in the brocade box in my hand, 23 of them are empty, and only one of them is written by His Highness. Later, I'll have to trouble the ladies to randomly pick one letter from them, and then it will be clear at a glance who is chosen." Hearing this, all the ladies present whispered. The so-called concubine selection was to choose the most beautiful, the most gentle and dignified, or the most talented among a group of ladies with good family backgrounds. Therefore, most of the ladies present hurriedly practiced their best skills before receiving the invitation to enter the palace this morning, and were ready to show it at the banquet to catch the attention of His Highness. No one expected that the final concubine selection was an inexplicable drawing of lots, which really made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, some people were secretly happy. No matter what kind of concubine selection method, there was a possibility that the concubine would be selected internally. On the contrary, drawing of lots was the most fair and reasonable. Everyone had a chance, and maybe the good luck would fall on them. Only Chi Juiyu frowned and pulled Chi Fei's sleeve, showing her displeasure. This method was beneficial to others, but it was extremely disadvantageous to her. The chance of 1 in 24 was too low. However, this method was proposed by Heir Xiaohou himself, and no one could change it. On the other side, Xiao Zhongping also clutched his handkerchief, revealing a nervous expression. Old concubine Shen, who was sitting next to Empress Cao, laughed. The so-called marriage is predestined by the heavens. In the end, it depends on whose hand the red string is wrapped around. This method is quite interesting. Don't you think so, Your Highness? Empress Cao smiled and nodded. When the time comes, those who don't get it don't have to complain. It's all fate. Thus, the drawing of lots began. Qi Zhuanyu was overbearing. She was the first to get up and walk to Ning Shu. But her hand grabbed a letter in front of the brocade box and put it down. Then, she hesitated and grabbed another letter. She hesitated for a long time but still couldn't decide which one to pick. Until Xiao Zhongping also came over, Qi Zhuanyu was unwilling to lose to her. Both of them bit their lips at the same time and took one of the letters. Then, more than 20 other ladies came to pick one letter one after another, and then returned to their seats one after another. Everything seemed to be going very smoothly, and there was no trace of a wave. Putting down the brocade box in her hand, Ning Shu silently stood aside, waiting for the last moment of the answer. Chapter 141. Some of the more impatient ones couldn't wait to open the letter as soon as they got it. Under the nervous gaze of the surrounding people, they slowly unfolded the folded letter and then showed a disappointed look. There were also some who were self-restrained and dignified. They first put the letter aside, but after a while, they couldn't help but open it again. Xiao Zhongping and Qi Zhuanyu looked at the opened letters nervously. Every time they saw a disappointed face, they secretly let out a sigh of relief and rejoiced in their hearts. Then, they continued to look at the next one with trembling hearts until the remaining 22 empty letters were all displayed in front of everyone. At this time, everyone's eyes were focused on them because there were only 2 of them left. Then, the final candidate for the heir's wife would definitely fall on one of them. Xiao Zhongping's heart almost jumped out of her throat. She forcefully pressed down on her wildly beating heart and softly pleaded to old Princess Consort Yu beside her. Imperial Consort Yu, please open it for Pinga. Old Consort Yu nodded and picked up the envelope. She took the letter from the maidservant and gently opened the cinnabar seal. Xiao Zhongping held her breath and opened the seal. In the next moment, the last tears in Xiao Zhongping's eyes rolled down. She bit her lips and threw herself into old Consort Yu's arms. Old Princess Consort Yu patted her back with heartache and let out a pitiful sigh. A crimson blush immediately rushed to Qi Zhuanyu's cheeks, making her reveal an uncontrollable joy. She immediately picked up the unopened letter and held it tightly to her chest. It's not Xiao Zhongping. So, it's her. It must be her. She desperately restrained her trembling fingertips and ordered her personal mammy to help her open the seal. Suddenly, Xiao Zhongping walked over with tears in her eyes, holding the hem of her skirt, and said, I'll help you open it. Looking at her red eyes, Qi Zhuanyu raised her eyebrows and smiled. Do you want to let yourself give up completely? I won't do as you wish. I'll open it for you personally and let you know that God is on my side from the beginning to the end. You. Xiao Zhongping gritted her teeth angrily and reached out to snatch it. Old concubine Su and old concubine Shu both frowned when they saw that it was getting more and more outrageous. They ordered the servants to stop it immediately and not make it too ugly. Old Princess Consort Yu leaned over and coughed. She hurriedly walked over to Xiao Zhongping and comforted him. Child, since things have already come to this, Why force it? In the end, it's because you're not fated to meet him. Xiao Zhongping trembled and finally let go, allowing old princess consort Yu to return the letter to the palace servant beside her, who then returned it to Qi Zhanyu. Qi Zhanyu sneered and opened the envelope in front of Qi Zhanyu. A line of words floated in the air like a dragon in front of everyone's eyes. The hundreds of people in the hall, real or fake, all smiled and congratulated him. Imperial concubine Qi even pressed down hard on her shoulder to show her satisfaction. Only Ning Shu, who had been silently watching the development of the situation, frowned slightly with inexplicable suspicion in her eyes. Then, she quickly imprinted the positions of everyone in the hall into her mind. Behind the screen, Xiahou Qing's face flashed a trace of unpredictability. Then, he slowly walked out of the screen under Qi Zhuanyu's expectant gaze. With the help of Hui Mo, he walked to Qi Zhuanyu. Until this moment, Qi Zhuanyu, who had always been domineering, looked at Xiahou Qing, who was as high as the clouds in the sky and snow on the branches. Her cheeks were red as she read the words on the letter in a trance and excitement. Your Highness. Thousands of flowers bloom on the night of the east wind. The lighting in the Weiyang Palace was excellent. Beams of bright sunlight shone into the palace through the hollowed-out auspicious decorations. Some of them fell on him, making him look like an immortal who had quietly descended to the mortal world. And in that light, he slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a perfect smile, and replied, blowing down, stars fall like rain. Behind him, no one noticed that Ning Shu almost immediately walked back to the screen and raised her head. Chapter 142. How did you do it? After the concubine selection, the banquet was temporarily over. Empress Cao smiled and took the women to the imperial garden to enjoy the flowers. The noisy Weiyang Palace was soon empty. Only dozens of maids and eunuchs stayed in the hall to clean up. Behind the screen, Xiahou Qing asked Ning Shu with an indifferent expression. Mirror. Ning Shu raised her hand and pointed at the top of the screen. Hui Mo opened his eyes widely and found the corner of the bronze mirror behind the palace lantern. He jumped up and took the bronze mirror down. The angle of the mirror is so good. It happened to be blocked by the palace lantern. I looked carefully for a while before I found it. Hui Mo handed the bronze mirror to Ning Shu. Holding the bronze mirror in her hand, Ning Shu frowned tightly. In addition to Qi Zhuanyu, there are 5 people who have touched the letter. They are the personal mammy who helped her with the fire wax, 13th princess who fought with her for the envelope, the 2 maids who were ordered by old Princess Shu to stop it, and old Princess Yu who persuaded Xiao Zhongping. After the incident, I immediately observed the position of everyone in the front hall. I found that only the maid who stood in the southeast corner of the front hall and was ordered by old Princess Su to stop the farce could see through the angle of the bronze mirror that we were preparing the letter behind the screen. As she finished her words, her sleeve slipped, and another letter appeared in her hand. She slowly unfolded it. There was a poem that was exactly the same as the one in Qi Zhuanyu's hand. And the one in her hand was the real one. As for the 24 letters she put in the brocade box before, they were all empty. The so-called concubine selection was a trap set by her and Xiahou Qing in advance from the beginning to the end. The purpose was very simple, to lure the snake to take the bait. Unexpectedly, the other party really did it. Using the mirror hidden behind the palace lantern, they peeped at the poem on the letter. When the maids were serving the dishes, they spread the news and forged an identical letter. The target was Qi Zhuanyu, and the quarrel between Xiao Zhongping and Qi Zhuanyu provided the other party with an excellent opportunity to steal the sky and replace the sun. This matter must have something to do with that palace maid. So, is it old Princess Su who planned this? Huemore was confused. He was surprised and confused, but that person is famous for being aloof from worldly affairs. She has no grudges with our Lord Pingnan's mansion. I didn't hear that she was not on good terms with concubine Qi. Why did she try so hard to set up such a big trap? What good would it do her to kill Qi Zhuanyu? From the imperial astronomer to today's consort selection, over 100 people were involved. She was an old concubine who was nearing 70 years old and only had a princess royal who was already married. Why would she raise such a big storm to deal with a teenage girl who had nothing to do with her and had no enmity with her? This was simply inconceivable. The relationship in the palace is complicated. Although the palace maid is old Princess Sue's maid, we can't directly conclude that it was old Princess Sue who did it. In short, at present, the first clue of the case has been found smoothly. Next, we should follow this clue to check the details of the palace maid first. After Xiahou Qing finished, he didn't hear Ning Shu's voice for a long time. So, he said, what do you think of? Ning Shu hesitated for a moment. She kept recalling what happened in the hall just now. After a while, she frowned and said, I don't think of anything. I just have a lot of questions. Xiahou Qing raised his eyebrows slightly with a trace of interest. Tell me. Chapter 143. Out of the corner of her eye, Ning Shu found a cup of tea not far away and immediately dipped it in her cup. She couldn't find an empty table or green table suitable for writing, so she bent down and started writing on the green bricks on the ground. But as soon as she wrote the first word, she felt that her neck was tightened and she was picked up from the ground. Hey? Right above her, Xiahou Qing showed an expression of disgust and said, What's wrong with you? Don't you want your fingers to write on the ground? I'm used to writing. Isn't this a habit? If I don't write something, I always feel that it's hard to sort out my thoughts, and I couldn't find a place for me to write. Moreover, this little girl's skin is coarse and thick, so writing a few words on this brick won't be a problem. She smiled embarrassedly, then quickly covered the back of her neck, snatching her thin and weak little neck back from his hands. She took 2 steps back and muttered in a low voice, But Your Highness, you just reached out and grabbed it. Don't you know that men and women shouldn't touch each other? What did you say? Xiahou Qing frowned. She couldn't help but recall the scene where she almost fell and clung onto him. Ning Shu's pretty face blushed slightly as she rubbed the tip of her nose and said with a smile, Hey, it's nothing. My daughter didn't say anything. Xiahou Qing snorted and waved his hand to Hui Mo. Hui Mo immediately cleaned up the small table with vases and moved it to Ning Shu. Ning Shu calmed down and began to think. First, it's true that this matter is related to the palace maid, but the number of people involved is definitely beyond our imagination. First of all, someone should know in advance that today's peace banquet is held in Weiyang Palace. Then, he could send someone to hide the bronze mirror behind the lantern on the screen. Then, the palace maid of old Princess Sue spied on our action and passed the news out. Then, someone outside the palace who received the news immediately made a fake and sent it back to the palace as fast as possible. Finally, someone found an opportunity to replace it. In this series of actions, more than 5 people had already surfaced. What's more, the palace maids who decorated the palace were ordered by Empress Cao, and the palace maid was old Princess Sue's maid. Besides, there was a master who could imitate Your Highness's handwriting. It was only a few hours from the curse incident last night to Your Highness's decision to hold a banquet to select concubines. But they could arrange such a long line in such a short time. These people must have been buried deep in the palace for many years. As she wrote, she drew out the entire process of the other party's crimes. Secondly, it's obvious that the other party's method of substitution is one of the 6 people who came into contact with the letter. But what I was curious about was, how was she so sure that the 13th princess would run over and fight with Qi Juanyu for the flower and let her fish in troubled waters? If it wasn't for that dispute, what would their plan have been? Next to her, Hui Mo looked at the string of water stains she wrote on the small table. He frowned and interrupted, It seems that the 13th princess is very suspicious, but I don't think it's her. She has always admired my young master. Today, she came to participate in the concubine selection at the risk of being severely punished. Moreover, when she opened her letter and found that there was no word, her sadness was absolutely real. It was impossible for her to give the opportunity of being the young master's concubine to Qi Juanyu. Old Princess Yu was on the side of the 13th princess, so she naturally wouldn't do this. Among the remaining 4 people, the 2 palace maids rushed to stop them because they were ordered by Old Princess. According to Lady Ning, there were too many variables. There were only 2 people left. Qi Juanyu and her personal mammy were in cahoots. Would it be possible that Qi Juanyu committed the crime herself? She has always been determined to be the young master's concubine, and this marriage is very helpful to Qi Juanyu. The Qi family is naturally happy to see it, so they arranged it together with old Princess Su. The more Huimo said, the more he felt that his idea was reasonable. He felt that he suddenly became clear-headed today. He was so smart that he was impressed. So he continued to say with bright eyes, and that letter has been in Qi Juanyu's hands. After all, she has the biggest chance to secretly change it. It's possible. Ning Shu smiled non-committally and continued to write the next 3. Third, since the other party could see the letter through the bronze mirror, it's possible that they didn't see me hiding the real handwriting of His Highness the Crown Prince. I'm thinking, if she saw it, why did she still insist on doing it under the nose of His Highness? What was her intention? Was it a provocation? Or did it deliberately show that she had to kill Qi Juanyu? From the last point of suspicion, the possibility of Qi Juanyu's doing was not very big. Knowing the intention of Xiahou Qing, she still pretended to be the chosen one. Wasn't she deliberately provoking Xiahou Qing? Although Qi Juanyu was domineering, she should understand this. But there were 6 suspects in total. Now they were ruled out one by one, which made the situation more confusing. After writing the last word, Ning Shu recalled that when Qi Juanyu saw Xiahou Qing walking towards her step by step from behind the screen, her blushing cheeks were full of shyness, trance, and joy. She suddenly sighed. If she knew that the letter that fulfilled her dream today would become a dagger to kill her in the future, how would she feel? Chapter 144. After listening to her 3 doubts, Xiahou Qing fell into deep thought. He said, "It seems that the situation we will encounter in this case may be much more complicated than the previous case. Complicated is not terrible, but the shadow in the dark is the most terrifying. Since the other party has decided to come out from behind the scenes, then we should face the battle head-on. Complicated threads seem to confuse people, but once there are more threads, there will be a time when they converge." Ning Shu answered slowly, "The grey threads of the grass snake are taken." Her voice was soft and calm, without any hesitation. Xiahou Qing inadvertently remembered that half a month ago, when she was in a bottleneck in the cloud leaf case, she couldn't help but reveal her unhappiness in front of him. Now she has become more silent, like a piece of unpolished jade dug out of a jade mountain. After being polished, she unconsciously exuded gentleness and firmness from the inside out. That kind of brilliance made Xiahou Qing's throat involuntarily move slightly. He walked out from behind the screen and said slowly, "What are you going to do next?" Ning Shu saw that he slightly raised his arm towards her. She was stunned for a moment, and then hurriedly stepped forward to support him. She said, "Since the target has been locked on Qi Juanyu, then keep an eye on her for the time being. As for the palace made beside old Princess Su, I will leave it to your highness." Xiahou Qing responded in a low voice and raised his chin towards Huimo. Then they walked out of the Weiyang Palace together. It was April and the sunlight was getting warmer. But he, who was bathing in the warm sunlight, was still wearing the black brocade robe and a fox fur cloak that would make others sweat profusely. His jade-colored face seemed almost transparent under the beautiful light, as if it would melt at any moment like a piece of ice and then disappear without a trace. Ning Shu thought for a moment and whispered, "Your Highness, if you finally find the person who poisoned you, how will you deal with him?" Xiahou Qing stopped and made a few light coughs. Then he spat out 3 words from his pale lips without hesitation, "Kill him." "And if he threatens you with the antidote," she said. Xiahou Qing raised the corner of his mouth. He seemed to be smiling, but there was no joy on his face. He slowly turned to Ning Shu and said coldly, "No one in this world can threaten me, not even my life." Ning Shu opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she swallowed the nonsense that was about to come out of her mouth. This was because she knew that this god made of ice and snow had always been sharp and angular. While the 2 of them were talking, they suddenly heard a commotion coming from the direction of the imperial garden not far away. A large group of palace maids and eunuchs ran over, looking nervous. Ning Shu frowned. She immediately stopped a servant and asked, "What happened in the imperial garden?" The 13th princess and the 4th young lady of the Qi family had a dispute. Both of them fell into the water. The palace servant was sweating profusely. He didn't bother to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He hurriedly replied and ran away. When Ning Shu arrived with Xiahou Qing, she saw that the two of them had just been rescued by the palace servants from the supreme liquid pool. More than 10 palace servants nervously surrounded the two of them. Qi Zhouyu was soaked. The exquisite makeup she had put on for the banquet this morning was all ruined. She could only hold on to the cloak handed to her by her nanny and shivered. As soon as she saw Xiahou Qing, Qi Zhouyu's tears rolled down. She felt wronged and said, "Your Highness, the 13th princess framed me. What nonsense are you talking about?" It was clearly Xiao Zhongping was so angry that her eyes were red. She pointed at Xiao Zhongping and said. Before she could finish, she heard the second young lady of Grand Tutor Qian's family suddenly exclaim, "Qi. Fourth young lady, there seems to be something behind you, what?" Everyone immediately looked over curiously. Qi Fei's brows were tightly knitted as she walked closer. She pulled out a stick of paper from Qi Duoyu's collar. The words on it were written in blood red. It was so insolent that it pierced the eyes of everyone present. Deranged madman, died an unnatural death. Chapter 145. Xiahou Qing couldn't see, but from everyone's shocked gasps, he could guess the gist of it. He whispered, "Is it those 8 words?" Ning Shu nodded silently and answered, "Yes." Qi Zhouyu's face turned pale and she almost collapsed. Miss. Her personal nanny, Mama Hui, knelt on the ground and hurriedly supported her tightly. She anxiously said, "Your Highness Consort Qi, Your Highness the Empress, Your Highness the Heir Apparent, someone wants to harm my young miss." Most of the people present didn't know the inside story of last night and didn't know about this unfathomable stick. They only felt confused and suddenly terrified. They covered their mouths, afraid that they would be involved in such a terrible matter. Imperial concubine Qi gripped the bamboo stick so tightly that she almost broke it. She suddenly raised her head and suppressed her anger. "When I first entered the Imperial Garden with Jueyu, I didn't find this bamboo stick. It hasn't even been an hour and this has happened. Someone must have deliberately approached Zhouyu during this period and waited for an opportunity to secretly put this inauspicious stick on her. Mother Hui, you have always been by Zhouyu's side. Tell me, who deliberately approached her and did this?" Mother Hui said, reporting to Consort Qi, "This old servant has always been by my miss's side. I have never seen anyone approach my miss. Even when she was chatting with Miss Qian, she was always a foot away from my miss. Only." Mother Hui stopped mid-sentence and looked at Xiao Zhongping. Then, with a bang, she bent down and kowtowed to Consort Qi, saying, "Only 13th princess walked over for some reason just now. Without saying anything, she pushed my young miss into the supreme liquid pool. The surrounding misses all saw it. Consort Qi, please investigate." Xiao Zhongping was also soaked. He was stunned when he heard this. "What nonsense are you talking about? I saw a poisonous bee near your miss and wanted to go over and warn her out of kindness. She was clearly the one who inexplicably pulled me into the water." "Poisonous bee?" Consort Qi's eyebrows twitched and some inexplicable emotion flowed through her eyes. She said coldly, "Where is the poisonous bee you mentioned? Did anyone see it? Really? You saw it just now, right? Am I right?" Xiao Zhongping said anxiously. However, she looked around for help. After searching for an entire circle, she could not find a single person willing to testify for her. There were only countless doubts, sighs, and disdain. A string of water droplets fell from her wet hair on her forehead. It was clearly the middle of April, but she was shivering all over, as if she was in the middle of winter. Thousands of miles of mountains, snow and ice covered the sky. Looking around, she was the only one. Qi Fei waved her wide sleeves and said, "Now that the situation is more or less clear, what else do you have to say? I know you're jealous because you didn't get chosen as the heir consort. But you should never have done such a thing. Do you think you can replace Zhon Yu just because you killed him? You're only shaming the face of the royal family. This consort will report this to His Majesty and request that His Majesty mete out a heavy punishment." Xiao Zhongping's entire body trembled. The bone-piercing coldness froze her from the inside out, causing her to be unable to utter a single word. Consort Qi. Old Princess Consort Yu, who had been silent all this time, staggered forward to support the tottering Xiao Zhongping. In terms of age, old Princess Consort Yu was only a few years older than Empress Cao, but she looked even older than the two dowager consorts. She covered her sleeves and coughed, then solemnly bowed to the Empress, Consort Qi, and the dowager consorts. Although the 13th princess has only been with this old one for a few years, this old one believes that this child is definitely not a vicious person. Moreover, she comes from His Majesty's flesh and blood. His Majesty is kind and benevolent. Even if she doesn't inherit everything, she should have at least 40 to 50%. In this imperial garden, there were hundreds of flowers competing with one another. It was possible for the 13th princess to mistake a bee for a poisonous bee. As for both of them falling into the water, there were many pebbles beside the pond. It wasn't uncommon to accidentally step on one and slip in. There was no need for Consort Qi to make such a big fuss over a misunderstanding. In the end, if the 13th princess really did it, she should have sent a palace servant to secretly stuff it onto the Qi fourth young miss. This time, not only did she personally do it, but she even pushed the Qi fourth young miss into the water. Wouldn't that arouse suspicion? I ask that all of you consorts be clear and investigate thoroughly. Otherwise, you'll ruin the 13th princess's reputation for no reason and let the person who truly harbors evil intentions get away scot-free. In the end, it'll harm the Qi fourth young miss. That would truly be a bad thing. Chapter 146. Old Princess, you spoke out to protect Xiao Zhongping. Empress Cao discussed with the two old concubines and decided to give her face. They temporarily ordered the palace servants to send Xiao Zhongping back to his own palace. It was said that Xiao Zhongping was frightened when he fell into the water. In fact, it was like putting him under house arrest. Qi Zhongyu was immediately sent to the fragrant hall, which was closest to the Taiyi pond. She was asked to change clothes to get rid of the cold. In one day, two farces happened in a row. One was bigger than the other. It was really tiring and frightening. The banquet was over. The young ladies of the various manors quickly returned to their manors and left the palace with a stomach full of fear and doubts. With their departure, the curse of the 8 characters could no longer be concealed. It was believed that before sunset tonight, everyone in the capital would know about it. Empress Cao accompanied the two tired old concubines back to the palace to rest. Hundreds of palace servants obeyed the empress' order. They bent down and buried themselves in the fragrant imperial garden to search inch by inch to see if they could find any clues. The black satin in front of Xiahou Qing fluttered in the wind. After hearing what had just happened, he gently twisted his fingers in his palm and calmly said, "How do you feel?" Ning Xu's eyes moved along with the palace servant's search. She instantly said, "Too arrogant." The other side clearly knew that the emperor ordered them to deliberately conceal the curse last night. Today, they revealed it in public. It was so deliberate. It was as if they were saying, "The more you are afraid of people knowing, the more I want the world to know." Qi Zhongyu, the future Shizi Fei of Lord Pingnan's mansion, was bound to die. No one could stop it. TSK, this kind of arrogance is really detestable. And it was a little rushed. She paused for a moment and said, "Last night, when the imperial astronomer first presented this piece of paper, 2 hours ago, when the imperial concubine was chosen, and not long ago, when Qi Zhanyu fell into the water, another piece of paper was placed in his collar. These several difficult tasks were all completed in less than 16 hours. If there is a little bit of evidence left, the whole game will be lost." He arranged it so impatiently. Is it because he is overconfident and fearless, or is there something that forced him to end this matter in the shortest time possible? What is this? Just as they were whispering to each other, a palace servant suddenly discovered a round object at the roots of the flower bushes beside the imperial liquid pool. He used all his strength to pull it out from the dense branches and leaves of the flower roots. The people around him immediately gathered around to take a look and exclaimed, "Eastern pearl, this is an Eastern pearl. With such a huge and round color, it must be worth a lot. How did it end up here? Ah, isn't this the place where 4th young Miss Qi and the 13th princess fell into the water? The Eastern pearl is here." Could it be that someone deliberately threw it here to harm the two of you? But even if someone deliberately threw it here, wouldn't it be fine to throw a glass bead or a pebble? Why did you throw such an expensive Eastern pearl? The palace servants began to discuss among themselves. Hearing the words Eastern pearl, Xiahou Qing immediately said, "Give me that pearl." What did he want the bead for? Ning Shu looked at him in confusion, but it was not his place to explain to her what His Highness Crown Prince did. She hurriedly lowered her head and went forward to borrow the bead from the palace servants. The round Eastern pearl fell into Xiahou Qing's palm. The pearl was lustrous, while His Highness's palm was white. For a moment, it was hard to tell whether the Eastern pearl was lustrous or His Highness's palm was more beautiful. Ning Shu was secretly drooling in her heart when she heard Xiahou Qing frown and ask in a low voice, "What color is it?" Ning Shu leaned closer and carefully looked at it. It's milky white microns. Under the sun, you can see a colorful luster. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiahou Qing said, "It's mine." Ah! Before Ning Shu could react, she heard Xiahou Qing snort and clench his fist. "A few days ago, at the Phoenix Terrace Golden Buddha ceremony, you exposed Xiao Yunyan's true colors in front of everyone and forced him to take you down with him. At that time, I didn't have anything useful, so I took this Eastern pearl from the jade pendant and hit his wrist and knee. After that, Juicy found one for me, but the other one was nowhere to be found. At that time, I thought it was picked up by the crowd, so I let it go and didn't pursue it. I didn't expect it to see the light of day today. Moreover, it was in such a situation." Hearing this, even Ning Shu couldn't help but be slightly stunned. At that time, the Phoenix Terrace case had not been solved yet, and they were in a tense period. All their energy was invested in that case. However, the other party had already stealthily extended his hand to the next case that had yet to come. Such a layout, such a plan, such a scheme. It was simply amazing, but also terrifying. Previously, they were still discussing whether the curse was targeted at Xiahou Qing or Qi Fei and Qi Zhouyu. Now, it was completely clear. It was never one of them, but two birds with one stone. Chapter 147. Suppressing the shock in her heart, Ning Shu calmed down and followed the clues to carefully analyze the situation. Both incidents were caused by the 13th princess. She is too suspicious and people can't help but suspect her. Ning Shu said, although logically speaking, it is impossible for the 13th princess to commit the crime. But I have a feeling that this case has something to do with her. Xiahou Qing made a sound of agreement and took out a jade tablet with the words Ping Nan Wang Fu engraved on it from his sleeve and threw it to Ning Shu. "Take my tablet and you can go to the 13th princess's palace to report and ask." Ning Shu took the tablet and did not move. "What is it?" Xiahou Qing asked. Ning Shu's watery eyes blinked and silently looked at the Eastern pearl in his palm. "Your Highness, don't you think the Eastern pearl in your hand looks like something?" "What?" Ning Shu said several things in one breath. Steamed meatballs, ice and snow-cold seeds, lychee meatballs, white jade fishballs, etc. Xiahou Qing's thick and lightly painted eyebrows raised slightly. He remembered that behind the screen in Weiyang Palace, before the consort selection began, she had already secretly eaten several plates of snacks and food. She should not be hungry. Luo Yu suddenly understood. He sneered. "After the case is solved, you can eat the entire Chasing Cloud and Chasing Moon restaurant. Your Highness is indeed generous." Ning Shu's eyes curved. See, it is so easy to talk to smart people. Although the imperial cuisine in the palace is good, in comparison, the Chasing Cloud and Chasing Moon restaurant is more delicious. In Wenfang Hall, Aunt Qi Jianyu was clearly wearing clean clothes, and every wet strand of hair had been dried by the nannies and palace maids. However, Qi Jianyu still hugged herself tightly. Her 10 fingers were so tight that her fingertips turned white. She clenched her trembling teeth and said with a face full of fear, "I'm so scared." She remembered that she had fallen into the water just now, as well as the talisman she had found on her body after falling into the water. A great panic filled her entire heart. Before entering the palace, she had already learned of the Shizi Fei's curse from the eunuchs that Qi Fei had sent. But hearing and seeing with her own eyes were two completely different matters. Even now, when she thought about the 8 words written on the bamboo stick with red cinnabar, she still had the urge to scream. Terrifying. It was too terrifying. That thing had mysteriously appeared in her collar, like the tongue of a viper, like the bullseye of a bow and arrow, firmly attached to her body, as if to say, death is already decided, it is only a matter of time. Just you wait. Tears rolled out of her eyes. Qi Jianyu grabbed Qi Fei's sleeve tightly and shook her head desperately, pleading, Aunt, do you think the wolf cub that I killed when I was young came back to take revenge on me? That's why he's been haunting me. Auntie, you have to save me, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. She had watched this child grow up. Unable to bear it, Qi Fei held her hand and said, don't be afraid. What wolf or not, it's just a beast. With Auntie here, even if it's a celestial being or a ghost, they can't hurt you, let alone a beast. This talisman must be someone who was jealous of you being chosen as the Shizi Fei, so he secretly made a ghost to scare you. You must not let your imagination run wild and hurt yourself instead. Really? Qi Jianyu's eyes were filled with tears. Her flower-like face looked like it had just experienced a storm, appearing weak and pitiful. Qi Fei's gorgeous face was full of ambition. Of course it's true. My Qi family's daughter is the most precious girl in the Great Yu state. Even the princesses in the palace can't compare to you. This time, since you were chosen as the Shizi Fei, it shows that Laoi is also on our side. What wolf demon haunting you, the talisman cursing you, Auntie will personally pull out the ghost. Don't forget, you are already the future Shizi Fei that Xiahou Shizi has chosen, how can he sit by and watch? Don't worry, my good Yu, your good days are still ahead. And your cousin and I, the unspeakable glory and splendor are also at our feet. Hearing Xiahou Qing's name in a daze, Qi Jianyu struggled painfully as if she was drowning, hugging a life-saving piece of driftwood. Her whole body suddenly surged with a fervent courage. She nodded vigorously and muttered to herself, yes, with His Highness Shizi here, he will definitely protect me and not let me suffer the slightest harm. I haven't married into the southern pacifying prince's residence, so I can't let evil people succeed. The position of southern pacifying prince's Shizi Fei can only belong to me, no one can take it away. Chapter 148. Xiao Zhangping's palace was where her mother, Wen Siren, lived before her death. It was located in the most remote southwest corner of the palace. Ning Xu walked from the supreme liquid pool to the palace. It took her half an hour to walk. It was enough to see how unfavored Wen Siren, who had soared from a palace maid to an imperial concubine, was. It was almost like she was in the cold palace. Several guards stood outside the palace, not allowing anyone to enter. Xiao Zhongping was also not allowed to step out. It was not until Ning Xu took out the token of the southern pacifying Wang Fu that the guards checked again and again that she was slowly allowed to enter. Xiao Zhongping was sitting in the empty palace in a daze. Seeing Ning Xu come, she was stunned for a moment. Then she stood up and said, I remember you. You are the little eunuch by Xiahou Shizi's side. Did Xiahou Shizi send you to find me? Ning Xu bowed according to the etiquette of eunuchs, that is correct. This servant greets your highness the princess. Xiao Zhangping's palms were red from clenching her fists. She took a deep breath and said, Xiahou Shizi, does he believe me? Just these few words made Xiao Zhangping's eyes turn red. However, she held it in, unwilling to let her weakness show. Before Ning Xu could respond, she hurriedly defended herself. Qi Juanyu really wasn't pushed down by me. That inexplicable bamboo stick was not stuffed into her clothes by me. Although I was jealous that she was chosen, I was just unhappy in my heart. I would never harm her. Ning Xu looked at her forcefully suppressed lips that had long lost their color. Suddenly, she could not bear it. Many people said that the 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping was very similar to the 4th daughter of the Qi family. They were both overbearing, arrogant, and insufferably arrogant. However, very few people knew that Qi Juanyu's arrogance was the arrogance of being pampered in the palm of the Qi family. Furthermore, she had the support of imperial concubine Qi for many years. On the other hand, Xiao Zhangping's pride was nothing more than a self-defense mechanism after being wronged. Inside, He was just a pile of snow that would collapse at the slightest touch. Your Highness, if my master doesn't believe you, he doesn't need to send this servant to your Highness. Ning Shu comforted her gently. That's why this servant has a few questions to bother your Highness. Your Highness, please tell me the truth. Only in this way can your Highness' injustice be washed away. The truth will come to light and you will not be wronged for no reason. Hearing Ning Shu's words, Xiao Zhangping's perturbed heart slowly calmed down by half. She forcefully blinked her eyes, blinking away the sourness in her eyes. She waved her wide sleeves, ordering all the palace servants in the hall to withdraw. She said, "Ask. If I, Xiao Zhangping, lie in a single word, I will die an unnatural death first." Many thanks for your Highness' trust, Ning Shu said. The first question, Your Highness, previously at the peace banquet in Weiyang Palace, why did you make a move to snatch the fourth Miss Chi's flower letter? The first question made Xiao Zhangping reveal an unbearable expression. She bit her lip and turned her head away. At that time, I knew that I wasn't chosen. In my heart, I was very unhappy. I didn't want to accept my fate, but I had to accept it. In this life, Your Highness and I are destined to be together. There is no possibility of dreaming. That's why I wanted to personally open Qi Zhuanyu's flower letter and witness the final destiny with my own eyes. I also wanted to completely give up. Was there someone who hinted to you, or was it completely from your heart? Xiao Zhangping shook her head. No one hinted to me. At that time, I was feeling sad and lost control for a moment. I really couldn't hold it in and lost myself like that. At that time, when you were fighting for the flower letter, did your Highness notice that someone went up to do something? Xiao Zhangping carefully recalled and said, I don't think so. At that time, I snatched the flower letter from Qi Zhuanyu's hands and it was always in my hands. Then, Her Highness, you came to persuade me and I let go. Then, Her Highness, you personally handed the flower letter to the palace servant who came to persuade her. In the end, it was returned to Qi Zhuanyu's hands. I watched the entire time and didn't find anything strange. What, is there a problem with that flower letter? Ning Shu didn't comment. She bowed her head and smiled. This servant was just asking casually. Your Highness doesn't need to take it to heart. Oh right, this servant heard Your Highness say at the side of the supreme liquid pool that you suddenly approached fourth young Miss Qi because you saw a poisonous bee surrounding her. Thinking of that matter, Xiao Zhangping's long eyelashes drooped. For some reason, deep emotions flowed through her eyes. Yes. Ning Shu said again, the imperial garden is full of bees and butterflies. There are several types of bees and their numbers are innumerable. How can Your Highness be sure that it was a poisonous bee? This sentence was like a needle that suddenly pierced Xiao Zhangping's heart and fingertips, causing her to tremble. Of course I know. No one in this world knows more than I do. In the empty and lonely center of the palace, Xiao Zhangping clenched her fists and almost shouted. Her heart rose and fell violently, as if she had fallen into a terrible nightmare and couldn't breathe. After a long while, she couldn't hold back her tears anymore. 2 lines of tears silently fell from her eyes. She said word by word, because my mother died, under that poisonous bee. Chapter 149. Died from poisonous bees. Ning Shu furrowed her brows and said, this servant remembers that His Highness Mufei, when Siren, was infected with an epidemic 6 years ago. No. Xiao Zhangping almost broke her fingernails. She tried her best to widen her eyes with a broken light. In the past, her Mufei had grabbed her hand tightly and begged her not to say anything because she wanted her to live. She wanted her to live like her name, to live peacefully in the palace. But even if she lived like a humiliated dog in the palace, not daring to speak the truth to anyone and allowing her mother to die in vain for many years, she still encountered everything that happened today. The matter of the curse was exposed. If the culprit could not be found in the end, then according to Qi Fei's domineering nature, she would definitely plant this disaster on her and make it difficult for her to live. So, did she have a choice? No. After a long period of silence and soundless wails, Xiao Zhangping stood stiffly like a puppet. He stood in the empty palace that seemed to be emitting a moldy smell from every corner, silently competing with fate. Ningxu had experienced this kind of heart-wrenching struggle before. She didn't say anything. She only took out a handkerchief from her sleeve and handed it to Xiao Zhongping, holding a tear for her. A water droplet splashed onto the handkerchief, creating a watermark. Xiao Zhongping took a deep breath and slowly opened her mouth. Guess, from the time I was born until I was 9 years old, how many times did I see Father Emperor? She raised the corner of her mouth and smiled as tears fell. She answered her own question. It can be counted on one hand. Even if I did see him, it was only during festivals and celebrations, mixed in with other brothers and sisters to pay my respects from afar. However, I didn't feel too sad because I had my mother by my side. There were countless beautiful imperial concubines living in this palace. Each one of them had a face that was many times more beautiful than my Mufei, but none of them had a pair of gentle eyes like my Mufei. However, Father Emperor only saw those pleasing faces and never noticed the warmth in my Mufei's eyes and the softness in her heart. Therefore, from childhood to adulthood, the impression we had was that we wore clothes that couldn't protect us from the cold in the winter and felt hot in the summer. We ate simple meals that even some eunuchs and maidservants couldn't compare to. Because in this palace, imperial concubine mother and I are invisible. No one can see us. But fortunately, his mother was very capable. She always thought of ways to take me to have snowball fights in the winter, to make swings in the spring, to set up awnings in the summer, and to weave grasshopper cages in the autumn. She made all kinds of interesting toys to play with me. Occasionally, she would secretly conjure up a candied fruit to make me excited for an entire day. I should be the most unpresentable princess in this palace. But even so, I was still happy. I was even willing to rely on my mother for the rest of my life and live such a simple and happy life. Until he was 9 years old. I suddenly realized that my mother, who had always been smiling gently, had suddenly fallen ill for some unknown reason. In just a few days, her face had turned sallow and pale. Worried, I asked her, "What's wrong? Do you want to see the imperial physician?" Imperial concubine mother repeatedly forced a smile and coaxed me that it was nothing. Until one night, she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. I panicked and cried to find the imperial physician, but imperial concubine mother stopped me and didn't allow me to go. She held my hand tightly and held me in her arms. She cried and said, "My Pinger is still so young. How will he live in this palace in the future? Heavens, I am willing to be a pig, a dog, a cow, a horse in the next life, in exchange for my Pinger to grow up safely." I was also young at that time and didn't know what to do. I could only cry. Mother gently licked my tears and took out a handkerchief from her bosom. In her hand was the corpse of a dead bee. She said, "Ping-er, remember, you have to take good care of yourself. You must be wary of bees that look like this. They will take your life." And An. Xiao Zhangping's eyes trembled as if a dam had burst. He couldn't breathe. The memories that had been deliberately sealed were released today. Every drop of water was like the kiss of his mother when he licked away his tears, carrying the taste of blood. Before she died, she clutched her chest tightly, as if there was a broken bellows there. Every breath she took was intermittent. She opened her eyes wide and looked at me pleadingly, saying, "Mother's good Ping-er. My Ping-er, you must remember. Don't mention my cause of death to anyone. Just treat it as if I died from an epidemic." Epidemic. Xiao Zhangping's pale face was full of ridicule. But I didn't give up. I ran out barefoot and knocked on the door of the Imperial Physician Hospital. When the Imperial physicians arrived late, my Imperial concubine mother had already taken her last breath. They diagnosed her for a long time before making a decision. Sure enough, it was as my Imperial concubine mother said. Chapter 150. The sunlight outside was still good. The bright light shone through the old window lattice and fell on the ground. Yin and yang, light and dark, cold and warm, it was incomparably distinct. And Xiao Zhongping was standing in the darkness. Her throat was choked with sobs, and only her tears could be seen. In the end, this seemingly domineering and arrogant 13th princess was just a young girl who had lost her mother. Since she was 9 years old, She had no choice but to disguise herself and struggle to survive in this cold palace. Every step she took was trembling, as if she was walking on thin ice. Ning Shu unconsciously felt a faint sense of pity in her heart. She once again raised the handkerchief in her hand in front of her and softly said, "May I ask your highness, is the poisonous bee that died that year still preserved?" "Of course there is. That is the thing that killed my mother." Xiao Zhongping frowned and resisted. "You want to ask me for it? But why should I believe you?" Ning Shu said, neither too fast nor too slow, "Because this servant is under the orders of the crown prince to clear the princess's name. Of course, your highness can choose not to believe me, and I will do my best to solve this case. But, without this important piece of evidence, it may delay the progress of solving the case. How to decide, it is all up to your highness." Xiao Zhongping lowered her head and hesitated for a long time. Ning Shu did not rush her and only stood quietly with her until she finally made a difficult decision. Biting her lips, she took the handkerchief from Ning Shu and said, "Okay, I believe your highness, so I am willing to give this to you. I hope you will not fail to live up to my trust. Remember, if you lie to me, I will put my mother's life and mine on your head." She wiped her tears with a handkerchief, lifted her skirt, and walked out of the palace. She walked to a long rotten swing in the courtyard, bent down, and dug with her slender fingers. 6 years of dust had long since covered that thing in layers. Every time she dug, her fingers hurt until another pair of hands joined in, doing the same with her. Xiao Zhongping was stunned. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at Ning Shu. A moment later, he lowered his head and continued to dig. About a quarter of an hour later, Ning Shu opened the wooden box full of mud and took out the handkerchief that was wrapped in the poisonous bee's corpse. She carefully put it away and put it in her sleeve. Then, she bowed and left. Xiao Zhangping's lips moved. Only when Ning Shu was about to leave the palace did he say, "Little eunuch, I forgot to ask your name." Ning Shu smiled and said, "Your highness is too courteous. This servant will return. Yangui, all right, I'll remember it." Xiao Zhongping slowly recited it. After a while, he couldn't help but say, "The way you looked at me just now, it was especially similar to my mother's. It was also a little like, him. Xiao Zhongping's face revealed a trace of embarrassment. Her tearful face didn't seem so pale because of this embarrassment. She lowered her head and spat out a few precious words from between her teeth. "Your Highness the Crown Prince," because of this layer of slowly floating blush, the face that was not outstanding like her mother's was now incomparably moving. Ning Shu thought, she had really hung all her heart on Xiahou Qing. Then, Ning Shu's heart turned slightly. He was stunned and couldn't help but laugh. Xiao Zhangping's mother was an extremely gentle person. She said that Xiahou Qing's eyes were similar to her mother's. So, the reason why Xiao Zhongping admired Xiahou Qing was because of an Oedipus complex. Then he heard Xiao Zhongping say, "There is one more thing. I want to take the liberty to ask eunuch Yang Gui." Ning Shu said, "Your Highness, please ask." Previously, I happened to hear the other brothers mention that His Highness the Crown Prince has an extremely. Xiao Zhongping deliberated for a long time before choosing a vague word. He hesitated and said, "A trusted little eunuch who is quite handsome and beautiful. I guess it should be you, eunuch Yang Gui. So, please tell me the truth. Are you and your highness really as the rumors say? Are you and your highness very close? Do you eat and sleep together?" After a short moment of astonishment, Ning Shu opened her mouth in a daze. She was about to explain when she heard Xiao Zhongping hurriedly wave her hand. She laughed awkwardly and said, "Eunuch Yang Gui, don't think too much. I don't have any other meaning. Compared to Qi Juanyu, I would rather that person be you." "Ha, ha. Ha, very good, very good. Your Highness." A flock of invisible crows flew past her eyes. Ning Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she listened to her imagination fill in the entire unspeakable drama from beginning to end. She was speechless and could only hold her forehead. Chapter 151. When Ning Shu stepped out of the high threshold of the palace, the sun had already set. The sun shone on her face through the palace wall, as if sprinkling a layer of gold on her snow-white face. Hui Mo was waiting for her not far away. When he saw her, he immediately waved his hand as if he was afraid that she couldn't see him. When Ning Shu approached, he immediately leaned over and whispered, "Just now, I checked it under the order of His Highness. The servant girl of old Princess Su who works as a ghost is called Shunxing. She entered the palace 16 years ago. Her family once committed a crime. Later, she was sent to the laundry bureau as a servant girl. She worked for many years until she won the favor of old Princess Su by chance and was appointed to work in the palace to get rid of the miserable labor. She was calm and never talked much. She just worked hard. In recent years, old Princess Su became more and more fond of her. Since 2 years ago, old Princess Su asked her to be her personal servant. She took her with her wherever she went. Shunxing seems to be ordinary and nothing special. Lady Ning, do you know what's so special about her? Hui Mo said excitedly. He deliberately kept Ning Shu guessing. His fluttering eyebrows seemed to be asking, "Do you want to know? Do you want to know? Ask me quickly." Ning Shu laughed and had to cooperate with him. What's so special about her? I searched through all her files and questioned all the maids who had worked with her one by one until I was dizzy. Then I found out that she used to be a close friend of Princess 13's mother, the late Wen Siren. Hui Mo's eyes were shining. The more he talked, the more excited he was. They were sent to the laundry bureau only a few months apart. Shunxing's family was convicted because of a crime. She was bullied in the laundry bureau. Wen Siren couldn't stand it, so she came out to protect her and saved her life. The two of them even slept on the same bed until Wen Siren was transferred to the Internal Servants Bureau before they separated. Not long after, Shunxing also won the favor of old Princess Su and left the laundry bureau. Don't you think it's a coincidence? I feel that there is a big mystery in this matter. Hui Mo didn't know what the secret connection was. However, from Hua Jian to the falling into the water curse, both of these things were related to the 13th princess, and the only confirmed accomplice was an old friend of the 13th princess's mother. This whole circle was linked together, and any random thought would make one's imagination run wild. Hui Mo was extremely excited, but at the side, Ning Shu revealed a look of bewilderment. How could it be so coincidental? The 13th princess was already under suspicion. More than 2 hours ago, Imperial concubine Qi had almost treated her at the Imperial liquid pool. Shunxing, this chess piece, had appeared. It was simply handing Imperial concubine Qi a knife. She lowered her voice and said, "Other than your Shizzy, does anyone else know about this?" "Of course not. I was secretly ordered by His Highness to investigate. Without His Highness's order, even if a knife was held to my neck, I would not tell anyone." Ning Shu frowned slightly. That's good. Let's put this matter aside for now and wait for the right time. She remembered that not long ago, she took Xiao Zhangping's tear through the handkerchief in her palm. She was not sure what kind of soul was hidden under Xiao Zhangping's sincere and sad face. She could only be sure that if the relationship between Shunxing and Wen Siren was revealed to Imperial concubine Qi, the 13th princess would be finished in an instant. It was impossible to save her. She said again, "Where is Shunxing's servant now?" Hui Mo's face was full of vigor, but in an instant, it was as if he had eaten a big bitter gourd. After a long while, he reluctantly said, "His Highness means that we should not act rashly and alert the enemy for the time being. He has privately visited old Princess Su and got her permission. He ordered me to dress up as a palace maid to serve in old Princess Su's palace and secretly observe and inquire about Shunxing to see if I can find any clues." His face was wrinkled like a bun, and every wrinkle was full of sorrow. Ning Shu almost burst out laughing. It was simply. Xiahou Qing was as cold as ice, but he repeatedly came up with such a mischievous idea, which made her gasp in amazement and admit defeat. She barely managed to stop herself from laughing out loud. She coughed lightly and forced herself to speak in a serious manner. "This is indeed a good idea. But I'm very curious. There are so many palace maids in old Princess Su's palace. You will inevitably have close contact with them. How can you avoid suspicion at that time?" She remembered that those raw garlic were very lethal, but it was not easy to escape the vicious eyes of a large number of palace maids. "Of course, I have my tricks." Hui Mo looked around and quietly took out a soft thing from his arms. "Lady Ning, touch it." Ah, what's this? Why did this shape look so much like a woman's chest? Ning Shu's mouth suddenly twitched. Chapter 152. Hurry up. Hurry up. It's really hard to refuse his kindness. Ning Shu has to reluctantly touch it. How is it? Does it feel great? Ning Shu nods. Hui Mo blinks his eyes and says proudly, haha. I got the inspiration from the fresh buttermilk you ordered in the restaurant. I mixed the buttermilk with the royal jelly and poured it into the cleaned pig urine. Then I put it on the chest. Even if you touch it through the clothes, no one will notice the difference. In addition, I have a unique magic weapon called Soul Intoxicating Powder. I developed it carefully. It can make people temporarily fall into chaos in a very short time. If someone really did notice that something was wrong with me, it would come in handy. But it's only effective for the first time. The more relaxed the mind is, the easier it is to succeed. If I use it later, it won't be effective when the other party is immune. I have to continue to improve it in the future. The amount of silvergrass may need to be added. Oh right, these days I have a lot of experience in wearing women's clothes. I feel that women's skirts are much cooler than men's pants. At first, it was a bit awkward, but later I got used to it and it was quite comfortable. I can use it as a reference to make some improvements in the future. The more he talks, the more ridiculous Ning Shu is. She can't help but touch her forehead. What's your master's attitude when you study these things? Hui Mo tidies up the things with a smile and prepares to modify it later. Master didn't say anything. He just asked me to continue to work hard. What's wrong? My ambition is to be the best inventor in the history of great youth. This kind of unorthodox invention, Ning Shu is speechless. She goes against her conscience and says, nothing. It's very good. She and Hui Mo go separate ways and do their own things. Ning Shu walks quietly along the palace wall. She hides the handkerchief in her sleeve even tighter. The known information almost confirms that the 13th princess is the suspect. At present, it has been found out that Shen Xing and Wen Siren were old friends. Wen Siren died 6 years ago due to a poisonous wasp sting. The cause of death has not been made public yet. Xiao Zhongping has hidden the corpse of the poisonous wasp well. It is not as if he has no desire for revenge. Shen Xing is definitely related to this case, and Xiao Zhongping is also involved in a series of matters. In the worst-case scenario, if Xiao Zhongping was the mastermind behind the scenes, then could it be that she murdered Qi Zhanyu because Wen Siren's death was related to imperial concubine Qi? Of course, this was just a random guess based on the few obvious clues at the moment. If he wanted to find out the truth, the next thing he had to do was, first, he had to find out why Wen Siren died. Second, this case involved a lot of people, and it was not something that could be solved with just a few people. Now that he had found Shen Xing, this snail, he would continue to follow her lead to see if he could find out more inside information. Right, there was also the strange matter of Qi Zhanyu being haunted by the wolf demon. Could it have some hidden connection with this matter? When Siren's death had been around for many years, it was not something that could be investigated in 2 or 3 days. Hui Mo should be able to deal with Shen Xing. As for Qi Zhanyu, should she think of a reason to contact her? That arrogant young lady was really scared out of her wits today. Thinking like this, Ning Shu quickly returned to the agreed place with Xiaoho Qing. Xiaoho Qing was not there. His Majesty heard about what happened before and after today's typing banquet and sent him for questioning, leaving Jusai to wait for her. Before Ning Shu could speak, Jusai had already nodded and saluted. He opened the box that he had been holding in his hand and presented it to her. Shiziyi thought that you might need it later, so he specially ordered me to prepare this for you before meeting His Majesty. Ning Shu walked a few steps closer to take a look and smiled. How did that guy know that she needed these? It was like a roundworm in her stomach. Putting away the box, Ning Shu returned the salute and thanked him. Thank you for your trouble. The sun was already setting in the west. Qi Zhanyu had suffered a great shock today and was left in the palace by imperial concubine Qi to comfort her. It was close to the time to release the key to the harem. She had to hurry. The other party's every move was urgent. She could not guarantee when they would make another move. If the future Shizi Yi of Pingnan Wang's mansion really went crazy and died an unnatural death, it would be really bad. Thinking like this, Ning Shu quickened her pace. However, she heard Ju Sai catch up with her again and solemnly said, "In addition, Shizi Yi ordered me to tell you, do whatever you want to do. Even if someone really dies in the end, you don't have to worry. With him, even if the sky falls, it won't hurt you." Her heart that had been running for half a day without rest seemed to have been blown by a wisp of wind quietly. Her tense limbs and bones silently relaxed. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment and then smiled slightly. "Thank your Shizi Yi for me." Chapter 153. The token was carefully checked 3 or 4 times before it was allowed into the fragrance hall. Ning Shu had just stepped into the hall when she was almost blinded by the treasures in front of her. All kinds of gold and jade treasures, jewelry, and silk almost filled half of the fragrance hall. Ever since the matter of Qi Juanyu choosing the heir consort came out, needless to say, consort Qi's rewards were endless. The other concubines and concubines of the other palaces also received rewards, almost breaking the threshold of the fragrant palace hall. As for the strange curse of the 8 characters, it was tacitly ignored by the palaces. After all, Nanping Wang's heir didn't say anything. In front of such a joyous event, no one was willing to be unlucky. Ning Shu had vaguely heard Qi Zhanyu's voice before she even saw her face. Those 2 bolts of silk were newly offered by Zhongchuan this year. Only 30 to 50 bolts of silk are produced in a year. They are worth more than 10,000 gold. Even Aunt only received 2 bolts of silk. Now, they are all in my hands. Pack them up carefully. If you accidentally break a thread, you won't be able to pay for it even with your heads. Beside her, her personal nanny, Mama Hui, smiled and joked, "Young miss, don't worry. I'm here. I won't let these rare things be damaged by those careless maidservants. This silk satin is so soft and precious. When young miss and His Highness get married, it'll be perfect to make 2 sets of sleeping clothes." Qi Zhanyu's cheeks reddened. She stomped her feet and said angrily, "Mother Hui, you can't make fun of me like this." Mother Hui covered her mouth and laughed. "How am I making fun of you? This is a joyous event that is set in stone. This old servant has never had a son or daughter in my life. I only dared to secretly treat young miss as my daughter. Now that young miss has such a good marriage, my heart is sweeter than honey. I only hope that young miss will give birth to a little prince soon after your marriage so that this old servant can continue to work hard for young miss." The anger on Qi Zhanyu's face deepened, but she couldn't hide the anticipation in her eyes. Mother Hui. This Qi Zhanyu was much cuter than her usual arrogant and despotic self. Ning Shu thought to herself and asked a palace servant to pass on the message. As soon as Qi Zhanyu heard that someone from the Nanping mansion had come to greet her, she hurriedly ordered someone to let her in. Qi Juyu recognized Ning Shu at a glance and said, "It's you, little eunuch. I've seen you at the Taiping banquet. You were the one who brought His Highness's letter to the front hall. In that case, you also played a part in my success today. Auntie Hui, reward me." Mother Hui immediately took out an ingot of gold and stuffed it into Ning Shu's hand. Ning Shu tried to push it away several times, but failed. She could only reluctantly accept it with a smile. Then, she took the box and said, "Fourth miss, you've been frightened again and again today. My family's heir is very worried, so he sent this servant to bring you some tonics that can calm your mind and calm your nerves. Please take them." After she finished speaking, she added, "In addition, His Highness ordered this servant to pass on a message to you. If Miss feels the need, Nanping Wang Estate will do its best to ensure your safety." Qi Zhou was touched. "Your Highness, did you really say that?" "Yes." Qi Juyu's face revealed a shy and self-satisfied smile. "It's enough to have his heart. As for the imperial bodyguards, Auntie has asked His Majesty to send more than 100 imperial bodyguards to guard the palace. The entire palace is tightly guarded and no thieves can enter. Please go back and tell His Highness to rest assured." When Ning Shu heard this, she scanned the surroundings. Concubine Qi really knew how to choose a place. This fragrant palace hall was originally a pavilion used to store books. There was a platform about half a jong high, and above that was a 2-story pavilion. Later on, it was converted into a palace hall for people to rest after admiring flowers and enjoying the scenery. Qi Jueyu was placed on the 2nd floor. Ning Shu walked all the way up from the outside of the hall. She discovered that from the outside of the hall to the inside of the hall, and then up the spiral staircase, there were dozens of guards with swords on each floor. Even a mosquito that entered would have its ancestral home thoroughly checked, let alone a thief. To be fair, this place could really be considered impregnable. She nodded and said, "This servant will pass on your message." She hesitated for a moment and said, "That's right, 4th Miss. There's something that His Highness would like to take the liberty to ask you about. It's about the matter of you being haunted by a wolf demon." He had heard a few words of gossip before, but most of the rumors were false and His Highness didn't take it to heart. But today, at the banquet, I heard the 13th princess mention that this matter is related to the marriage between the two manors. It's also related to Mrs. Safety. Would Miss please tell us so that His Highness can lend a helping hand? Qi Jueyu, who was calm and composed just a moment ago, suddenly had a change in expression. She almost blurted out, "No, no such thing. Don't talk nonsense." Chapter 154. After speaking, Qi Jueyu realized that he had overreacted. He hurriedly covered it up with a smile and added, "What I meant to say was that a servant in the residence had been scolded by me previously. In a moment of indignation, he faked a wolf's paw print in my room in order to frighten me as revenge. Later, it somehow spread outside and through the storyteller's mouth. The more it spread, the more outrageous it became. There were really people who believed it. Little eunuch, please be sure to tell His Highness that there has never been a wolf demon, let alone the so-called ominous. His Highness, please don't listen to others' slander. So that's how it is. This servant will save it." Qi Juanyu forced a smile and gathered a strand of loose hair on her temples. "I was indeed shocked today. I feel a little unwell and want to rest for a while. If there is nothing else, little eunuch, please go first." Ning Shu raised her head and glanced at Qi Juanyu's flickering eyes. "If it is really as you said, then why did you look so flustered just now? What is the blue mark that has accumulated over a long time? What is it that made you so afraid that you can't sleep and toss and turn?" However, Ning Shu knew that since Qi Juanyu didn't want to say it, no matter how many times she asked, she wouldn't get an answer. Therefore, Ning Shu bowed, left the box, and turned to leave. Before she left, Mama Hui gave her an ingot of gold, which implied that good things come in pairs. Ning Shu weighed the heavy weight in her palm and clicked her tongue. It was at least 10 taels. This was an unexpected surprise. She didn't run for nothing. Ning Shu walked down the ochre wooden ladder and vaguely heard a few whispers between Qi Juanyu and Mama Hui from upstairs. "Mama Hui, do you think that this place is so secure, then, that thing can't chase after us? That's natural. This is the Imperial Palace, guarded by the Imperial Qi. That monster won't dare to act rashly. There are also more than 100 guards sent by concubine Qi to protect Miss here. It is 100 times safer than outside. Miss, you can rest assured. In addition, this old servant will always be with Miss. Even if someone really wants to harm you, this old servant will be the first to block in front of you." "Then I'm relieved. Mother Hui, I have a headache. I'm going to lie down for a while. Don't call me for dinner, I don't have much of an appetite. Keep a close eye on the rewards from the concubines in the palace. Get someone to pack it up and send it back to the manor. You must not damage it, otherwise it will be a great crime. This is a small matter. Leave it to me." Ning Shu deliberately slowed down her pace. Finally, she heard the sound of Mother Hui helping Qi Jueyu into the room to rest. Then, she fell silent. While caressing the 2 gold ingots in her hands, she pondered what the thing that Qi Jueyu was so afraid of was. Monster. Could it be that there really was such a wolf demon? Walking out of the fragrant hall, Ning Shu raised her head outside the hall and looked at the towering palace that was 30 or 40 feet high in front of her. It was surrounded by dense palace walls and a whole circle of guards. She thought that if someone really wanted to break in and harm Qi Jueyu, he would have to grow wings. Thinking of this, Ning Shu turned around and rushed back to the agreed place with Xiahou Qing. But she didn't expect that before Xiahou Qing arrived, she saw Huemore, who looked nervous first. Seeing her from a distance, Huemore immediately rushed to her. "What's wrong?" Ning Shu asked. Huemore's face was green. He swallowed hard and said, "Shunxing is dead." "What?" Ning Shu was slightly shocked. She hurriedly restrained herself and said, "What's the matter? Take me there quickly. It's my fault. I was careless." Standing in front of Shunxing's body, Huemore gritted his teeth and said guiltily, "Not long after I disguised myself and sneaked into the palace of old Princess Su, I found that she committed suicide. It must be that when I investigated her before, I was not too careful and leaked the information. She knew it. Before taking the order, young master told me to be careful and not to let her commit suicide after she found out. But I'm so useless." Chapter 155. If a person wants to commit suicide, there are 1,000 ways. You can't guard against it. Before she acted today, I'm afraid that she had already planned to be exposed and arranged for her funeral. You're not to blame for this. Ning Shu bent over and looked at the woman lying flat on the couch. This woman had spent most of her life bowing and nodding in the palace. She was wearing a set of clothes that she didn't believe but were very neatly starched. Her hands were peacefully placed on her chest, and every strand of her hair was neatly combed. Her face showed a kind of blue after being poisoned, but her expression was extraordinarily calm. There was even a slight smile on her lips, as if she had finally fulfilled her wish of many years. She was satisfied with peace of mind. "What happened before she died?" Ning Shu asked. "I asked the palace maids who were with her. They all said that after she came back from the Taiping banquet with the old imperial concubine, she didn't go anywhere. She stayed in her room and didn't talk to anyone. She seemed to be in a good mood and even hummed a song. Then she said that she was a little sleepy and wanted to take a nap. Then she lay down to rest. After I sneaked in, I waited outside her room for a while and didn't hear anything. I was a little flustered, so I rushed in and found that she had stopped breathing." Huimo frowned and said, looking at her face, "She should have died of poison. But I just hurriedly checked her throat and stomach, and didn't find any poison." With his words, Ning Shu's eyes slowly slid over Shunxing's hands, arms, soles, and other parts of her body. She didn't find any wounds. Finally, her eyes fell on her neatly combed hair and said, "Pull out that hairpin and see." Huimo answered and pulled it out. Sure enough, the hairpin was shining with a strange blue-purple color, and there was a touch of blood on it. Ning Shu couldn't help but sigh. That means she was prepared to die early. Even if we caught her one step ahead, we couldn't stop her. Every day, countless people quietly disappeared into ponds, wells, and corners of the cold palace in this crowded imperial palace, which was home to tens of thousands of people. Shunxing's death was nothing. It was just that the only exposed clue at present was broken. Huimo sighed as he sealed up Shunxing's body and all her belongings. He was going to take them back to the palace and continue to check them one by one to see if he could find anything. He thought that everything that had happened today was already exhausting enough, but he didn't expect that something even bigger and more bizarre had yet to happen, and was quietly waiting for it to suddenly break through the ground before the arrival of the next day, causing everyone to be in fear and trepidation, and stupefied. Qi Zhuanyu had been captured by the wolf demon. No one would have thought that in the pavilion of the royal palace, under the heavy security that not even a mosquito could get in front of 150 palace guards, as well as her own maidservants, she disappeared without a trace in this starless and moonless night. Only a red dress she wore during the day floated down slowly from the second floor of the palace as high as 40 feet like a ghost after a scream. It rolled a few times in the wind and fell on the grass beside the pavilion. It was covered with bloody wolf paw prints. Ning Shu had just laid down and was about to fall asleep when someone knocked on the door. She jolted awake from her half-asleep state. She had a splitting headache and was in a bad mood. Then, she heard the news. She opened her eyes and woke up at once. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the palace gate opened wide. Ning Shu entered the palace in the carriage of Prince Nanping's mansion with morning dew on her body. Then she squatted on the ground and looked at the silk dress full of wolf paw prints. She sighed silently with her face in her hands. She had a premonition that the days without day and night would come back in the next period of time. It was a pity that her beautiful face couldn't endure for long. She was afraid that she would become a haggard old woman in advance. What a waste of God's gift. Beside her, Chi Juanyu's maidservants were sobbing. Mother Hui was even out of breath from crying. Even concubine Chi, who hurried over after hearing the news, couldn't help but turn pale. She said in shock, How could this be? Another maidservant was also scared pale. She looked at the silk dress in front of Ning Shu in horror. It must be that monster that took Miss away. It must be. That monster is back. It's back for revenge. What should we do? I'm afraid that Miss is in danger. Hearing this, Ning Shu had an idea. She got up and walked to the maidservant's side. She said softly, May I ask what the monster you're talking about is? Shut up. Don't talk nonsense. Mother Hui rushed over and wanted to cover the maidservant's mouth, but it was too late. The maidservant had already blurted out, a wolf demon. When Miss was 7 years old, she killed it. Chapter 156. Ning Shu blinked curiously at the maidservant's words. There really was a wolf demon. This was really strange. Before the maidservant could continue, Mother Hui reprimanded her in a low voice, Xiong-jin, be quiet. Have you forgotten Mrs. Instructions? The maidservant named Xiong-jin's lips seemed to be glued together. She didn't dare to continue, and the others didn't dare to interrupt either. Ning Shu watched the undercurrent between the Qi family's servants. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. She straightened out the non-existent creases on her robe and slowly said, Is your young Miss's advice more important, or is her life more important? At this point, your Miss's life is in danger at any time. If you still don't want to tell us the truth and block her last chance to live, then don't blame my Nanping mansion for not caring about it. She finished speaking coldly and turned to leave. Behind her, Imperial concubine Qi's expression was tense. If the Nanping mansion really ignored it, didn't that mean that this marriage alliance might also fall through? Thinking of this, Imperial concubine Qi frowned and said coldly, What's the matter with that wolf demon? Hurry up and tell us the truth. Ning Shu stopped in her tracks. Since Imperial concubine Qi had spoken, the maidservants couldn't hide it anymore. The maidservant named Xiong-jin knelt on the ground and reported truthfully, reporting to everyone, It's like this. 9 years ago, when my Miss was 7 years old, she went out to play and happened to meet a vaudeville troupe. She saw a strange beast in the troupe. It looked very strange and was about the size of an 8 or 9-year-old child. It was covered in spikes and wolf fur. It looked a bit like a wolf, but not completely like one. It seemed like a century-old wolf demon that had cultivated into a spirit. That monster was very smart. Not only could it understand the human language, but it could also write a few simple words. The words it wrote were all auspicious words that made people happy. My Miss was young at that time and took a fancy to it at first sight. She teased it for a while. Ning Shu asked, What kind of teasing? Nothing more than making it kneel and kowtow. That monster was very obedient and did all of it. The young Miss was very happy and wanted to ride on its body. She wanted to try out the story of riding a monster and soaring into the sky. However, she didn't expect that after riding on the monster for a few steps, the monster's strength would be exhausted. Its knees went soft, causing my young Miss to fall heavily to the ground. A large chunk of her chin was knocked out. My family's young mistress was so angry that she cried loudly. She was afraid that she would be disfigured, so... Ning Shu asked again, So what? You killed it? Shuddering, Xiong-jin swallowed and said with difficulty, Yes. Miss was so angry that she ordered a few servants to put the monster into a sack and beat it to death with an iron rod. The monster knelt on the ground and trembled. It slammed its forehead on the ground and kowtowed to Qi Juanyu to admit its mistake. However, Qi Juanyu's heart was not softened even after dozens of begging. She waved her small hand and the servants behind her caught the monster and put it into the sack. The maidservant could still recall the bloody scene at that time. The iron rod had only swung down a dozen times, and bright red blood had seeped out of the dirty sack. The thing in the sack had constantly dodged and twitched, but where could it escape to? Miserable howls kept coming out of the sack. Woo woo, woo woo. It was like a child who did not know how to speak yet. It was doing its best to beg for mercy. However, it did not expect that Qi Juanyu was so angry. The more sorrowful its cries were, the happier Qi Juanyu would be, and she would beat it harder. Not long after, the thing in the sack let out a final humming sound and stopped moving. She was the one who took the initiative to tease the monster. Later, she fell from the monster's back and got injured. However, she took out her anger on the monster and destroyed a creature. Ning Shu did not agree with this. She frowned unhappily, and then, "What did your miss do with the monster?" Xiong Jin's voice was even softer. After killing it, Miss did not take it to heart. She casually threw a silver ingot to the juggler and left. The carriage dragged the bloody sack along the street for an entire journey. Only then did Miss completely calm down. She ordered the servants to throw the sack on the side of the road and took us back to the residence. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz. When the maidservant finished her story, the surrounding people did not know how to react. They only felt their hair stand on end. Ning Shu finally understood. She had done such a cruel thing at such a young age. No wonder Qi Zhanyu had never dared to speak of it. Anyone who heard it would think that she was cruel, bloodthirsty, and repulsive, let alone continue to be her future princess consort. Chapter 157. A living person disappeared just like that without leaving any traces behind. Could it be that it was really done by the wolf demon? Immediately, there were rustling sounds of discussion in the surroundings. That's too scary. It can speak human language and write. If it's not a demon, then what is it? There are so many bloody paw prints. That thing must have died with grievances and came back to take revenge on fourth young miss. What nonsense. Consort Qi raised her eyebrows and immediately interrupted these sensational speculations. This is the Imperial Palace. With His Majesty's golden dragon guarding it, even a wolf demon wouldn't be able to barge in. That wolf demon has been dead for 9 years. Why didn't it take revenge earlier or later? Why did it have to wait until now? I don't believe it. There must be something fishy going on. Mother Hui, you tell me. When did you notice Jueyu's disappearance? Also, what happened before she disappeared? Who did she come into contact with? Mother Hui hurriedly wiped her tears and said intermittently, "Young miss hasn't been sleeping well recently. She couldn't sleep when she heard the slightest sound. Thus, she ordered us not to get too close and just to guard outside the hall." This old servant was not at ease, but after thinking about it, there were so many guards around, and this 2-story pavilion was 4 jong high. Even an expert with Qinggong wouldn't be able to fly in. Young miss shouldn't have any problems, so we obeyed. When I helped young miss into the room, it was around 5 p.m. After that, I came out to do some work. Around 6 p.m., we suddenly heard a sound coming from the room. We were startled and rushed into the room. In the end, we saw that the bed where young miss was originally lying on was empty. When we looked again, the tightly shut window was now wide open. Young Miss's red dress slowly floated down from the window. And young miss, we couldn't find her anymore. As for who she came into contact with. Before the incident, old consort Yu came and asked if young miss was well on behalf of the 13th princess. At that time, I told her that young miss was already asleep. I'm afraid that it would be inconvenient for her to meet. But I didn't expect that old consort Yu would insist on meeting her. She even pushed the door open to take a look. When she saw that young miss was indeed asleep, she didn't have the nerve to disturb her. She withdrew and said that she would leave first today and come back tomorrow. She even ordered us to pass on her good intentions to young miss old consort Yu. Ning Shu repeated this name in her mind and asked, "What time is it?" Mother Hui pondered for a moment and couldn't remember. Xiong Jin, on the other hand, remembered, "It's 9:15. At that time, I was wondering why old Princess Consort Yu was coming so late at night. Therefore, when I went downstairs to welcome you, I curiously looked at the hourglass." Ningshu thought for a moment. Then how did old princess consort you come and leave? Did you take anything with you when you left? I think they came in a palanquin. When they came, they brought some medicinal herbs and tonics to calm the mind. When they left, they didn't take anything with them. After that, he asked a few more questions, but he didn't get any more valuable information. Imperial concubine Qi ordered the imperial bodyguards to immediately search the entire fragrant palace hall inch by inch. She didn't believe that there really was a demon with wings that could fly in and take her away. After Cao Hu and His Majesty heard about it, they sent another 300 guards to assist. However, nearly 500 people had turned this fragrant palace hall, which was neither too big nor too small, upside down. Even the roots of every blade of grass were peeled off, for fear of any hidden suspense. Ningshu followed the imperial bodyguards, crouching, crawling, or standing on ladders. She wanted to knock down every brick and search every corner to find a secret passage or mechanism that could hide someone. Unfortunately, she didn't find anything. In the novel, Liang Shanbua and Zhu Yingtai turned into butterflies and flew away hand in hand. Could it be that the fourth young miss of the Qi family had also followed in their footsteps? Chapter 158. Ningshu stood in Qi Zhuanyu's room and watched for a long time. Her mind slowly simulated all the possible scenes that could have happened last night. Then, step by step, she walked down the ochre-colored stairs and returned to the blood-stained silk dress on the ground. She squatted for a long time without saying a word. Only when the candlelight gradually weakened and the sky brightened, did she feel cold all over. A cloak fell from her head to her face, covering her completely. Ningshu didn't even need to think to know who had come. Pulling herself out of the cloak, Ningshu maintained her squatting position and raised her head. This angle made Xiahou Qing appear abnormally tall. She said, even if a stone fell into the water, there should be some sound. But Qi Zhuanyu, a living person, actually disappeared without a sound in this impregnable palace. Doesn't your highness think this is ridiculous? Ridiculous. Xiahou Qing indifferently replied, which counted as a show of support. On the side, seeing the heir apparent toss his cloak to Lady Ning, Ju Sai hurriedly put on the other cloak in her hands for Xiahou Qing. And then, she blinked. That's it. Then, Xiahou Qing lightly kicked her foot and said, let's go. What was the meaning of this? Ningshu asked, what are we going to do? With Ju Sai's support, Xiahou Qing turned and walked away. Go back and rest. Ningshu hesitated and stood up. But fourth young Miss Qi, she's already lost. Can you find her in a short time? Xiahou Qing's voice was as low as water in the glow, leisurely and carefree. I can't. Ningshu shook her head. The other party's plan was far-reaching and dared to make such a big move. It was impossible for them to find her quickly. But isn't your highness worried? After all, she is your princess consort. If he really is cursed by the 8 characters and dies an unnatural death in the end, then it would really disappoint fourth Miss Qi's deep feelings of coming to participate in the heir consort selection even though she knew it was dangerous. She quickened her pace to catch up with him to see Xiahou Qing. Xiahou Qing said in a flat tone, the premise of her unnatural death is that she must first become insane, so she shouldn't die in a short time, right? Ningshu was instantly flabbergasted. Although what he said was quite reasonable, in any case, his heir's consort had gone missing. What kind of person was he to have such a reaction? But she is, after all, the heir consort you have chosen. Ningshu was speechless. Xiahou Qing sneered coldly, you're wrong. This Shizi Fei was not chosen by me, nor was it chosen by the heavens. It was pushed to me by the person behind the scenes. Why should I be flustered as he wishes? That seemed to be right. The other party's actions were undoubtedly to make them flustered so that they could watch from the sidelines. Then they might as well do the opposite and go against the other party's wishes. However, his tone was too flat. It was so calm that it was as if he was casually mentioning the grass that he had just stepped on, the wind that he had just encountered, or the falling flowers that he had brushed past. There was no hatred, no resentment, no disgust, and no worry. There was no fluctuation in his tone, but it was even more ruthless. Ning Shu silently followed behind him. After a moment of silence, she said, "For your highness, does it not matter who you choose to be the heir consort?" Ning Shu lowered her head as she spoke, so she was caught off guard and suddenly bumped into his back. Ning Shu hurriedly covered her forehead and took a step back, afraid that she would break this noble master. Xiahou Qing's footsteps stopped and he slightly turned his face to the back. He said with a complicated tone, "What do you think?" Note 1. Shuwu, another name for the sun. Chapter 159. I'm not a roundworm in your stomach. How would I know? Ning Shu muttered softly. Noticing that his brows were slightly furrowed, the alarm bells in her heart rang. She hurriedly tried to make up for it by putting on a smiling face. What my daughter means is, your highness has mountains and seas in your heart, clouds, and the blue dome of heaven in your heart. My daughter's aptitude is so dull, even if she cracked her skull, she wouldn't be able to guess your highness' thoughts. Seeing that Xiahou Qing's frown did not loosen and he continued to remain silent, Ning Shu thought for a moment before continuing, "Moreover, in my heart, your highness is so handsome, like a celestial in a painting. Not to mention noble ladies and princesses, even the Jotian goddess would not be worthy of a single hair on your highness's head." Xiahou Qing still did not speak, but his expression darkened even more. The more she said, the uglier his expression became. Instinctively, she felt that if she continued, she would be finished. Ning Shu hurriedly lowered her head and apologized. "My daughter boldly made a joke about your highness. Please forgive me." Hearing her deliberately pretending to be obedient, but in fact, heartless voice, Xiahou lightly curled his lips into a cold smile. The black brocade covering his eyes fluttered in the wind. He lifted his feet and no longer waited for her. "Yes, you don't know anything. You only know how to joke." Ning Shu did not know which sentence had offended this beautiful prince made of ice. She wailed in her heart. She could only seal her mouth and obediently follow behind without saying anything. She suddenly remembered the 13th princess's words. In Xiao Zhangping's heart, this person had the same gentle gaze as her mother. It was unforgettable for her. Why was it that when facing her, Ning Shu, they either strangled her to threaten her or ridicule her? It was like two different faces. Thinking of this, a strange feeling suddenly floated through her heart. It swam through her heart like a fish tail. Before she could detect it, the transparent fish tail swayed and quickly swam away. Because just as she reached the gate of heaven influence, she saw old princess consort Yu's carriage coming from afar. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat. She took a few steps forward and whispered a few words to Xiahou Qing. After getting Xiahou Qing's approval, she called a few people to help put on a show. The coachman of Prince Yu's residence was a meticulous and cautious old man. He always drove the carriage smoothly and steadily so that the old princess consort wouldn't be shaken at all. Thus, he was deeply trusted by the old princess consort. Today, he drove the carriage slowly as usual, preparing to leave the gate of heaven influence and return to the Wang mansion. Unexpectedly, the gentle old horse in front of him suddenly slipped and let out a panicked neigh. Then, the wheels of the carriage jolted a few times, which made him turn pale with fright. Inside the carriage, old Princess Yu cried out in alarm. The coachman hurriedly lashed the whip, but the horse was completely frightened. Just as the carriage was about to go out of control, a few figures suddenly dashed out and hugged the horse tightly, stabilizing its hooves. Two more people then grabbed the wheels on both sides, and only then did Kuang Lan stop. Inside the carriage, old Princess Yu was still in a state of shock. What's going on? The coachman hurriedly jumped off the carriage and found a few round pebbles on the ground. Your Highness, the horse accidentally stepped on the pebbles on the road and was momentarily startled. Fortunately, there were a few eunuchs to help. On the side, after trying their best to stabilize the carriage, a few eunuchs wiped the sweat off their foreheads and bowed towards the inside of the carriage. This servant pays respects to your Highness. A corner of the carriage's curtain was lifted. Inside the carriage, old Princess Yu let out a few intermittent coughs and sighed. Which palace are you from? I really have to thank all of you this time. Reporting to your Highness, this servant is in charge of cleaning near the gate of heaven influence. We can't bear your highness's greeting. There were a few pebbles here and we didn't clean them up in time. Please forgive us, your highness. What are you talking about? If it weren't for your timely appearance, I'm afraid that I would have met the old prince directly today. As old princess Yu spoke, her coughs became even more severe. The leader of the eunuchs said worriedly, Your Highness, are you frightened? This servant will invite an imperial physician for you right now. It was Ning Shu who had her head lowered. Old Princess Yu let out a long sigh. This old one is indeed frightened, but it's not because of this matter. It's because the Qi family's fourth young miss disappeared from the palace without any reason, leaving behind only a piece of clothing with a bloody claw print. This is truly shocking. I clearly saw that lass with my own eyes before this incident happened. Who would have thought? Let's not talk about it anymore. Just thinking about it makes me scared. I'm already old and useless. I know that I can't help with this matter, so I didn't want to cause trouble for His Majesty and the imperial concubines in the palace. That's why I quickly left the palace. The eunuchs listened quietly, not daring to speak. When old Princess Yu finished sighing and ordered the coachman to continue, Ning Shu hurriedly said, Your Highness, these pebbles are too slippery and annoying. Just now, a few of them were kicked away by the horses. If they accidentally rolled into the wheel of the carriage, there might be more trouble in the future. Why don't Your Highness wait for a moment and let this servant make sure that there aren't any mistakes before inviting Your Highness back to the residence? Old Princess Yu thought for a moment and said, Then I'll have to trouble these young gentlemen. Ning Shu and the others said in fear and trepidation, This servant is doing his duty. Ning Shu waved her hand and led the others to quickly check the carriage. They carefully looked at every gap in the carriage and secretly pressed on the bottom of the carriage. Then, they all retreated to the side of the road and bowed as they watched Prince Yu's carriage leave. Chapter 160. There was only old Princess Consort Yu and her mama in the carriage. I didn't see anyone else. I secretly peeked through the curtains and didn't see anything like a wooden box that could hide someone. In addition, the bottom of the carriage was very thin and didn't look like it could hide a living person. Ning Shu only climbed into Xiahou Qing's carriage after Prince Yu's carriage was far away. Originally, she had her suspicions. After all, old Princess Consort Yu was the last person to see Qi Zhanyu. Moreover, the time of her visit last night was too strange. At that time, the sky was already dark. Visiting at such a late time, although it was said to be out of concern, it seemed to be intentional. Therefore, she had just led people to put on a show. However, after the investigation just now, it seemed that this suspicion couldn't be established. Ning Shu couldn't help but sigh. However, she was already prepared. If she could find out so easily, it would be a waste of the other party's plan. Only Ning Shu raised her face and looked at Xiahou Qing, who was only a small table across from her. Her voice was like a kingfisher. I still have some doubts in my heart. Old Princess Consort Yu went to visit Qi Zhanyu so late at night and left without saying a word. Was it really just a sudden impulse? There's no need to rush. Whether it was a sudden impulse or deliberate, we can slowly investigate. Xiahou Qing clenched his fists and coughed softly. Ning Shu looked carefully and found that his jade-white face showed fatigue. It seemed that he didn't sleep well last night. Thus, she said, Your Highness stayed in His Majesty's palace last night. Was it because of fourth Miss Qi's case? She waited at the palace gates last night and didn't wait for him until the key to the harem was released. She only waited until Juicy came to tell her that he would accompany her tonight and asked her to go back and rest first. Then, she left the palace with the Qi estate's carriage. Xiahou Qing took a sip of the tea that Juicy poured and handed to him. His tone was casual as he said, This case is just one of the many. It's not a big deal. Ning Shu was speechless. Then there's something even bigger. Xiahou Qing said, Southern Yang sent an envoy to ask for the princess's hand in marriage. Ning Shu nodded. She had heard about it. This was also the reason why the 13th princess disregarded the ancestral rules and barged into the peace banquet. Xiahou Qing coldly raised the corner of his mouth and tapped on the small table with his knuckles, making a crisp sound. The dowry they want is 10 cities. Ning Shu was stunned. How arrogant. However, after a brief moment of indignation, she also sighed in understanding. Although this was unexpected, it was also reasonable. His Majesty was a conservative person. Although he had wielded a sword while riding a horse when he was young, he had only led a few small battles. After he ascended to the throne, he deeply understood the principle that the son of a rich family should not sit under the awning and never held a sword again. Since the previous dynasty, the Great Yu dynasty had placed more importance on civil affairs than military affairs, causing the border countries to become restless and even provoke them. Under the seemingly rich appearance, there were actually deep worries. 11 years ago, the invasion of the Han dynasty was an example. Fortunately, at that time, Xiahou Qing offered advice to resolve the crisis. Ning Shu was very curious. Southern Yang was provoking them this time. What method could Xiahou Qing come up with to resolve it? Then, Your Majesty, do you plan to marry them? She asked tentatively. Yes. Ning Shu frowned. Then what about the cities? Xiahou Qing still said one word: give them away. Ning Shu's frown deepened, almost forming a knot. Today, 10 cities would be taken away. Tomorrow, it would be 100 cities. Following that, the entire Great Yu dynasty might be forcefully taken by the other side. Therefore, once this was done, only 4 words would await the Great Yu dynasty: eternal damnation. However, if they refused to cede the cities, it would give the other side a reason to start a war. In this kind of situation, whether they gave or not, it was not a good idea. It was really hard to get off the tiger. Just as she was worrying, she heard Xiahou Qing continue to speak as if he was taking a stroll. However, it is not Southern Yang, but Beizun. 3 years of taxes from 10 cities will be given to Beizun. Wait for their cavalry to cross the desert and come to Yangcheng Pass to take it personally. Huh! Ning Shu was stunned for a moment, but she immediately reacted. Beizun and Southern Yang were originally one country, but after internal strife, they had never stopped fighting. However, Beizun was located in the desert and was not as rich as Southern Yang. Therefore, they had been at a disadvantage for many years. Furthermore, the people of Beizun had been suffering in poverty for many years, training them to not care about their lives. 3 years of taxes from 10 cities was a drop in the ocean for the Great Yu dynasty, but the people of Beizun were willing to risk their lives for it. Yangguan City and Southern Yang bordered each other. If Beizun wanted the money, they would have to invade Southern Yang territory. The War of 10 Cities and the feud between the two countries would definitely cause chaos. The Great Yu dynasty could naturally find a chance to breathe and then make a deeper plan. Raising a wild leopard and letting it fight with a tiger. It had to be said that this move was really harmful. Of course, Ning Shu did not dare to say this out loud. She clasped her hands together and slowly bowed towards him. She was convinced and said, "Your Highness has a great plan." Chapter 161. Ning Shu suddenly thought that if Xiahou Qing was born in the imperial family, Xiao Yuni and the others might not have a place in the imperial family. However, their fates were already set. It might be a good thing that they didn't have to step on the imperial family's bottomless quagmire. Xiahou Qing scoffed softly, his lips curling up. "Aren't you thinking of harming others to benefit yourself?" Ah, how did he see through it? Although it was easy to talk to smart people, it was really stressful to be too smart. Ning Shu smiled embarrassedly, her eyes blinking as she showed her sincerity. "How could that be? My daughter's admiration for your highness can be seen by the sun and the moon, the heavens, and the earth." She looked as if she wanted to swear an oath and show him her sincerity. Listening to her obedient and fawning voice, like the dewdrop in the middle of a new lotus in early summer, soft and dripping, Xiahou Qing's throat was dry and he suddenly felt thirsty. He picked up the teacup and took another sip to hide it. After a while, he continued, "Tell me what you've found so far." When they got to the point, Ning Shu immediately became serious. "When your highness was discussing state affairs with his majesty, I went to ask about Qi Juanyu's situation before she went missing. According to the Qi family's servants, she went into her room to rest yesterday and didn't come out after that. Old Princess Yu was the last person to see Qi Juanyu, and it was 9:15. This was confirmed by several servants, so it shouldn't be wrong. Later, at 11:15, Mama Hui and the others rushed in after hearing the commotion, but she had already disappeared. According to the current time, Qi Zhuanyu should have disappeared between 9:15 and 11:15. Then, the key was released at 5:15, and the palace gates opened at 3:15 the next day. Therefore, if Qi Zhuanyu was kidnapped, she must have been hidden somewhere and could only be taken out of the palace after the palace gates opened. After all, there are many guards in the palace, and it's not a good idea to hide in the palace. Therefore, when she saw that old princess consort Yu's carriage was about to leave the palace, she had an idea. Xiahou Qing listened quietly and nodded. You don't have to worry about this. After hearing that Qi Zhuanyu went missing, I have already asked His Majesty to order the palace guards to strictly check all the carriages leaving the palace, regardless of whether they are noble or commoner. He thought for a moment and then asked, how is the terrain around Fragrant Hall? Ning Xu dipped her fingertips in water and drew a simple topographic map of the Fragrant Palace Hall. Beside her, Ju Sai stuck his head out to take a look. He realized that the topographic map was really lifelike. It was the kind that could only be understood but not described. There were a few squares and a few circles. Perhaps only Lady Ning knew what she was drawing. He silently glanced at her and tactfully retracted his gaze. He did not interrupt. Ning Xu was keenly aware of this. She awkwardly rubbed the tip of her nose and continued to analyze after drawing. She thought, fortunately, Xiahou Qing can't see. I don't have to embarrass myself in front of him. Let's talk about the topography of Fragrant Palace Hall. Fragrant Palace Hall was originally a converted library. Apart from the main pavilion, it was surrounded by high palace walls. I followed the imperial bodyguards and searched inside and out, but did not find any hidden compartments or secret passages. Qi Zhuanyu's bedroom was located on the second floor. Apart from the servants guarding the door, there was only one window in the hall. It was empty outside the window. Not even the shadow of a tree could be seen. Xiahou Qing muttered to himself for a moment and then followed her words. So the biggest point of suspicion is when and how did the other party steal Qi Zhuanyu under the noses of so many people? Yes. Ning Xu nodded and continued, there is also Shen Xing, who committed suicide. Her actions indicate that she most likely participated in this matter to avenge Wen Siren. But what role does the wolf demon play in this matter? Is it just a diversion that the other party used to cover up their actions after hearing about it? The wolf demon that was killed 9 years ago and the bloody claw marks that began to appear half a month ago. Wen Siren who was killed by the poisonous bees 6 years ago and Shen Xing who committed suicide yesterday, these two seemingly unrelated matters finally intersected with Qi Zhuanyu. It was really confusing. Oh right, there was also the imperial astronomer. The mystery of the blood signature had not been solved yet. A lot of questions were thrown at them as if they were free. Really, life is full of disasters, one disaster after another. Horizontal scroll. My condolences. Chapter 162. Ning Xu jokingly thought. Then she yawned and felt sleepy. Xiahou Qing did not make a sound and the carriage was comfortably quiet. Ning Xu could not help but fall asleep on the small table in front of her. A soft brocade ribbon was gently tickling her face and the tip of her nose with the breeze outside the window. She subconsciously reached out to catch it. She half opened her eyes and found that she was holding the end of a piece of black satin in her hand. One part of the brocade embroidered with bluegrass was hidden in front of his eyes, while the other part was caught in her palm. In her half-awake state, Ning Xu looked at the person in front of her who was like a famous painting. She vaguely whispered, this case should not be simpler than the Phoenix Terrace case. It might be several times more complicated. If my daughter can successfully solve the case, can I ask for another reward from His Highness? What do you want? He asked. I want to see His Highness' eyes. Until they got off the carriage and returned to the Duke's estate, Ning Xu was stunned. She did not understand why she had made such a request. She did not know where she got the courage to ask Xiahou Qing to take off the black satin for her to see. Why did she feel that it was inexplicably frivolous? Ning-shu, Ning-shu. Although His Highness the Crown Prince is pitilessly handsome, you should know that you can't touch a tiger's butt. That's right, after she offended him, how did he answer? It seemed to be, but. Ning-shu sighed and held her forehead. Forget it, forget it. Anyway, he should be used to her shamelessness. Let it go with the wind. Quietly entering through the side door, Ning-shu avoided a group of laundry maids and prepared to quietly return to her room. Last time, she acted on her own initiative in the Phoenix Terrace case. After the incident, her mother was worried for a few days and was afraid that she would get into trouble. Therefore, before leaving the estate, she specifically asked for Scythia to cover her up and not let her father and mother find out. Unexpectedly, as soon as she stepped into the room, she saw Forsythia winking and glaring at her with a conflicted expression, gesturing towards the inner room. Ning-shu's heart was alarmed. Before she could react, Princess He-shin had already walked out. Princess He-shin sighed, "Shu-er, did you forget what mother said to you a few days ago?" Ning-shu braced herself and stepped forward. She held her mother's hand and said in a soft voice, "There is another case in the palace, which is related to heir of Xiaohou. I owe him a big favor before, so I acted recklessly again. Mother, please don't be angry with me. You are my most cherished daughter. How could mother be angry with you? It's just that I've repeatedly told you to stay away from Xiaohou Qing." His body, Princess Hashin's words stopped abruptly. He has a chronic disease, and it can flare up at any time. When the time comes, you won't be able to tell, so it's better to keep a distance from him from the beginning, a little farther, a little farther. Although Princess He-shin's pause was extremely fast, it still couldn't escape Ning-shu's keen nerves. She carefully understood the meaning of her mother's words. She had a speculation. Does mother also know that Xiaohou Qing has a strange poison? However, her mother obviously deliberately avoided this topic. She couldn't get any results even if she asked. So, Ning-shu pursed her lips and smiled. "Mother, don't worry. Daughter and heir of Xiaohou are only related to the case, nothing else. How can a person like daughter who has been married 3 times get into his eyes? Mother, you think too highly of me." Princess He-shin came over and reached out to comb Ning-shu's hair hanging by her ear. She tenderly looked at her most beloved daughter in front of her. From babbling, she gradually grew up to the age she was when she was with Empress Xiaoju. Then, she grew up to the slender and elegant appearance in front of her. Her heart was filled with thousands of thoughts. Mother doesn't mean that you don't deserve him. My daughter is graceful, beautiful, and intelligent. You are worthy of all the good men in the world. But that man can't be him. Remember, absolutely, no. Daughter, do you know why? Ning-shu asked carefully. You don't need to know. You only need to know that mother only wants you to be safe and happy, without any disaster or worry. You can live a smooth life. Then, before Ning-shu asked, she slowly held Ning-shu in her arms and gently patted her back with her soft hands. In a place where Ning-shu couldn't see, her eyes were watery like wings. She whispered in a voice that no one could hear, "As my daughter, I'm ashamed of you." Chapter 163. Princess He-shin blinked her eyes and quickly recovered her usual warmth. She released her. "That's right, the Yun family's young master returned to his hometown a few days ago. Your marriage has also been cancelled. Your father has asked someone to look at a few people. There may be some clues. You should prepare early." A single sentence caused Ning-shu's vision to instantly darken. There were only 5 months left until her 17th birthday. Her 3 husbands had failed one after another. Her father was so anxious that he began to think of ways to find a 4th husband for her. It scared all the young masters in the city so much that none of them left their houses. They were afraid that the Duke would take a fancy to them. If that happened, they would have 8 lifetimes of bad luck. Although not long ago, she solved the Phoenix Terrace case in front of 300,000 people and fiercely made a name for herself. But under her deliberate spread, the common people slowly thought that she had an expert to guide her. Because of this, her reputation as a heavenly cursed star continued to spread. Her first husband died in battle. Her second husband died of illness. Although her third husband was lucky enough to survive, he lost his memory. He was full of poems and amazing literary talent. He had to learn everything from scratch. Heavens, for most people, this was worse than death. So, if you want to keep your life, stay away from Ning Shu. These 6 words were hung on the bedside of countless young masters in the capital. Every day when they got up, they would read it before going to bed. They would remember it in their hearts to keep them safe. She thought that her father should have given up. She didn't expect him to still be so tenacious. It really made her cry out in grief. You said before that you would never marry into the imperial family. Your father and I will not force you. Among these people, Prime Minister Tan's son, young Master Tan, I think he is quite good. Although he was a bit unreliable in the past few years, he became more and more decent after entering the Supreme Court. Mother will go to see Mrs. Tan and sound her out. I must find the best home for my baby Shu. Princess Hixin thought about it. She didn't have time to find trouble with Ning Shu. She stepped out of the door and prepared to find the Prime Minister's wife to talk about old times. Behind her, Ning Shu hurriedly called, "Mother, Mother." Princess Hixin's figure was already gone. Ning Shu had a headache and held her forehead. In the end, she could only lie on the bed helplessly. Forget it, forget it. Let's take care of the present first. As for the rest, we can only deal with it as it comes. He slept soundly all the way until noon. Ning Shu sat in front of the table and tasted the cloud dream chicken and lotus seed tofu that had just been made in the kitchen. They were all dishes that the kitchen maid had just learned and were very suitable for Ning Shu. Yun Meng Bao in particular, brushed the tender suckling pig's front thigh with a special honey sauce, then slowly roasted it over the charcoal fire. When it was 60 to 70% dry, she took it down, wrapped it in oil paper, and served it. This kind of food was fresh, sweet, and elastic. It wasn't so dry that it couldn't be chewed. It was just right. If he got tired of it, he could use a cup of lotus seed tofu, and he would instantly feel refreshed. As Ning Shu enjoyed the food, she thought about whether she should start with the imperial astronomer, the wolf demon 9 years ago, or the death of Wen Siren. An unexpected person came to Duke Ning, interrupting Ning Shu's short period of leisure. May imperial concubine Qi have good fortune and peace. It was an octagonal palanquin. The curtains were airtight. Obviously, they didn't want to be seen by others. In the palanquin, imperial concubine Qi wore a scarlet peony on her head with 3 six-tailed phoenix hairpins. She looked at Ning Shu, who was kneeling and saluting, with a smile that wasn't a smile. Half a month ago, the Empress gave Wan Qingzhang's case to you. The result was very good. Now, this concubine will also give Zhang Yu's case to you. What do you think? Chapter 164. Replying to Imperial Concubine Qi, the Phoenix Terrace case was truly due to my luck. Along the way, I accidentally solved it. Now that I've been given an undeserved reputation, I'm truly ashamed to receive it, and I'm even more undeserving of your praise. Ning Shu lowered her head and obediently responded to the gorgeous Imperial Concubine Qi. Her terrified appearance was exactly like a helpless and mediocre little quail. Luck. Imperial Concubine Qi slowly sneered, then your luck has been good since you were 5 years old. It's really God's blessing. As soon as Ning Shu heard this, she knew that this overbearing Imperial Concubine Qi was going to bring up old scores. She silently sighed in her heart and braced herself to endure this ancestor's deliberate provocation. Unexpectedly, she suddenly changed the topic and laughed, leaning towards Ning Shu with cold eyes. If the information I received is correct, the person who participated in the case as a little eunuch of Prince Nanping's estate these 2 days was you, right? I didn't expect that a girl like you, who doesn't seem to be outstanding, would actually be able to hook up with Heir Xiaohou. Your ability is truly not small. Ning Shu looked at her in astonishment. Imperial concubine, you want to ask where this concubine got the information? Imperial concubine Qi lowered her eyes and fiddled with her exquisite pearl armor, leisurely saying, you can guess on your own. This concubine didn't come here today to waste time with you. I only have one thing to tell you. if you want to accept this case, you have to accept it. Not only do you have to accept it for this concubine, but you also have to handle it well for this concubine. In addition, there's one more thing that this concubine wants to remind you. Prince Nanping's estate isn't something you can encroach on. It's best if you immediately give up that muddled thought. Otherwise, we'll settle the old and new scores together. After Imperial concubine Qi finished her domineering warning, she returned to the palace with her boundless arrogance. Ning Shu didn't even have the chance to refuse. Last time, she had agreed to help the Empress get rid of consort Wen. If she refused Imperial concubine Qi this time, she would be standing on the Empress's side and opposing Imperial concubine Qi. However, she had already become a thorn in the side of many people in the last case. It wasn't easy for her to keep a low profile for a few days, but now, she was forced to go to Liangshan. He wanted to roast her on the fire and wouldn't stop until she was cooked. Ning Shu couldn't help but find joy in the midst of bitterness. This is great, I don't have to pretend to be a little eunuch of Lord Pingnan's mansion anymore. One after another, they warned her to stay away from Xiahou Qing. It was as if she really had some bad intentions towards Xiahou Qing. Although she was indeed a little curious about him. Yes, just a little. The Chancellor of the Supreme Court, Feng Zheng, was an old man in his 60s who was ready to retire at any time. Since 10 years ago, he had often been ill. He did not care much about anything and did not offend anyone. He wished that he could turn 70 in the blink of an eye and retire at home. The sentence he said most often was, "Aya, Aya, what should I do?" Thus, after Qi Jueyu's case was exposed, he fell ill again. After saying, "Aya, Aya, what should I do?" the case was transferred to the Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor. The Supreme Court's Vice-Chancellor was only in his 20s and was a very quick-witted person. After receiving orders from the higher-ups to take over this case, he found out that quite a few nobles were involved. That legendary curveball, the eldest daughter of the Ning family, had also been personally selected by Consort Qi. Thus, he spent a large sum of money to reserve the largest private room in the Chasing Clouds and Chasing Moon restaurant and set up a banquet so that he could get in touch with the various nobles. When Ning Shu arrived, the Vice-Chancellor was temporarily held up by miscellaneous matters and had not yet arrived. Under the guidance of the servant, she pushed open the carved door of the private room. Ning Shu thought that there would be no one inside and did not expect to see a person standing by the window with his hands behind his back. He was wearing a scarlet cloak and was tall and slender, exuding a faint arrogance. Ning Shu stopped in her tracks and hesitated for a moment. She wondered if she would be too disrespectful if she left at the last minute. Because this person was none other than Xiao Yuni, who gave her the most headaches. Chapter 165. Before Ning Shu could retract her footsteps, Xiao Yuni had already turned around. Ning Shu had no choice but to say, "Greetings to your highness." Staring at Ning Shu, who was curtsying to him from 3 to 4 feet away, her attitude respectful but extremely distant, Xiao Yuni smiled, his smile cold and bitter. "Shu you're going to completely distance yourself from me." Ning Shu lowered her eyes and answered quietly, "Your highness must be joking. Your highness is the son of the emperor and is a noble, while I'm just an ordinary official's daughter. How would I dare to overstep your boundaries?" Seeing her attitude, Xiao Yuni's expression turned colder and he sneered. "You don't dare to overstep your boundaries towards me, but you dare to do so towards Prince Xiahou." Sensing Ning Shu's frown, Xiao Yuni suppressed the raging fire in his heart, closed his eyes and took a breath, his tone softening. "I'm just joking with Shu Shu you don't have to take it to heart." Ning Shu paused and said, "Was it your highness who told Consort Qi that I was pretending to be a eunuch in the Lord Pingnan's manor?" The fire that he had been suppressing could no longer be suppressed and Xiao Yuni laughed coldly. "So what if I did? If I didn't expose this matter, could it be that I would have allowed you to spend time with that blind Xiahou Qing?" Hearing him being so rude, Ning Shu showed a disapproving expression. "Your highness, why do you have to be so vicious with your words? Are you trying to say that I'm vicious?" Xiao Yuni narrowed his eyes and took a few steps closer. "Shu I've known you for 11 years and we're childhood sweethearts. You should know me best, so I don't have to hide it in front of you. You'd better not defend another man in front of me. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to control the knife in my hand. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room was extremely tense, like a bow that was pulled to its limit and would break at any time. Facing such a stubborn Xiao Yuni, Ning Shu suddenly did not know how to deal with him. Fortunately, the door creaked open. I'm really sorry. This lowly official was caught up in some miscellaneous matters in the Yamen and kept the two of you waiting. Please forgive this lowly official's mistake. An anxious voice rushed in, temporarily easing the tense atmosphere in the room. Ning Shu took the chance to walk away from Xiao Yuni. She turned back and saw a young man in an embroidered robe running in, hurriedly wiping the sweat off his forehead as he bowed apologetically. This person had a round baby face and was neither tall nor short. He smiled at everyone he met, and he didn't look like an adult at all. He was clearly an amiable and harmless youth. Secretly rejoicing that this person had appeared to resolve the situation, Ning Shu smiled faintly and said, "You must be the Shaoqing of the Supreme Court. My daughter Ning Shu greets the Lord." When the man heard Ning Shu introduce herself, he suddenly froze for some reason. An inexplicable naivety appeared on his face, and then he said cheerfully, "Ah, what do you mean by sir or sir? Lady Ning is being so courteous, it's really too much for this Tan. It's my first time meeting Miss, it's my pleasure to meet you. Lord Tan, you're already a Shaoqing at such a young age. You're really a pillar of the country. My daughter admires you very much. Lord Tan, why are you so modest?" Ning Shu greeted the other party politely. She had just said a few words when she suddenly felt that something was wrong. Wait a minute. His surname was Tan. Her heart skipped a beat and she suddenly remembered that this Shaoqing of the Supreme Court seemed to have the surname Tan and his name was Siwei. He was the youngest son of the Prime Minister Tan's family and the most anticipated candidate among the candidates that her father had chosen for her to be her fourth husband. As for her mother, she had only gone to the Prime Minister's family this afternoon to get closer. Chapter 166. If Xiao Minglan was the biggest weirdo in the capital city, then Tan Siwei would be the second weirdo. When he was 8 or 9 years old, he accidentally read a travel book about mountains and rivers. He set his ambition to imitate Shuxiaka and travel to all the famous mountains and rivers. But how could Prime Minister Tan and his wife bear to let their youngest son be exposed to the elements? So they tried their best to stop him. But young Master Tan was stubborn. Once he set his ambition, he would not change his mind. Either he would climb the wall today and accidentally fall from the wall and break his bones, or he would fly down from the roof with a big kite on his back and escape with the wind. In the end, he would be hung on a tree branch for an entire day and night, becoming a joke to countless passers-by. In short, he would be escaping or planning to escape for 300 out of 365 days in a year. He was famous throughout the city. Until 2 years ago, when he reached an agreement with Prime Minister Tan, he suddenly changed his mind and entered the Supreme Court. Many people were waiting to see if this young master would continue to cause trouble. They didn't expect that although this young master looked unreliable, he was very reliable in doing things. Within a few years, he was sitting in the position of Shaoqing. This was also the reason why Duke Ning liked him. Hearing Ning Shu's polite expression of respect, the bitterness on Tan Siwei's face became even stronger. He hurriedly said, "Miss Ning, you flatter me. It really makes me feel ashamed and fearful. Please don't say that. Miss, you solved the Phoenix Terrace case bravely, which really made me amazed. I have always wanted to have a chance to ask you for advice. Today, I have finally met you." As he spoke, his baby face faintly blushed. He looked pure and innocent, completely different from his dissolute elder brother. Awkward, incomparably awkward. Ning Shu wailed in her heart, wondering why she had been so unlucky recently. Then, she pretended not to understand anything and smiled apologetically. She was thinking that today's meal would be difficult and how to get through it. Then she heard a voice outside the room. The voice was respectful, cautious, and lively. It was a little familiar. "Shizi Yi, there is a threshold in front. Be careful." Then, Ning Shu saw Xiahou Qing slowly step into the room with Huemo's help. For some reason, His Highness the Crown Prince was not wearing his usual black clothes today. Instead, he was wearing a frost-colored robe. His cloak was also of the same color. This Xiahou Qing was different from his cold, indifferent, and alienated appearance when he was dressed in black. This Xiahou Qing was elegant, gentle, and jade-colored like a celestial being. As soon as he entered one's sight, his eyes lit up and he was breathtaking. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, Ning Shu came back to her senses and looked around. Thus, Xiao Yuni, who was dressed in scarlet, Tan Siwei, who was dressed in a blue python robe, and Xiahou Qing, who was as white as a fairy, surrounded Ning Shu, forming a tripartite formation. A word silently entered Ning Shu's mind. What was it again? It was really a hell on earth. Although Tan Siwei was a weirdo and pure person, he was not sloppy when it came to serious matters. When he saw that the nobles had all arrived, he immediately arranged for the servants to start preparing for the banquet. Incense was lit, tea was served, and dishes were served. He also called for musicians to liven things up. In addition to Ning Shu and the other three, there were also 2 officials from the Ministry of Justice who were ordered to investigate the imperial astronomer. The 2 officials were very tactful. They knew that their official positions were low and did not deserve to sit with the nobles. Thus, they sat together. As a result, only Xiahou Qing, Xiao Yuni, and Tan Siwei were left with an empty seat beside each of them at the square table. Ning Shu silently glanced at the 3 seats and the people next to them. Her face was numb. Tan Siwei did not know what was going on. Seeing that Ning Shu was motionless like a piece of wood, he took the initiative to stand up and invite her. Lady Ning, there are still 3 seats left. If Miss doesn't mind, why don't you sit with me? On the other side, Xiao Yuni snorted coldly. He raised his eyebrows and glanced at Tan Siwei, then looked at Ning Shu. It doesn't seem appropriate for Lord Tan and Shu to sit together for the first time. Speaking of which, Shu and I have known each other for many years and have taken care of each other. Shu, you should come over to my side. At the last table, Huemo, who was standing behind Xiahou Qing, rolled his eyes and immediately raised his voice. My lords, you may not know this, but in the Phoenix stage case, Miss Ning and my Shizzy were partners all the way. They had a tacit understanding and should sit together with my Shizzy. Chapter 167. No matter which of the 3 seats she sat on, it seemed to be wrong. It was the middle of Yang Yu, the beginning of summer. It was the most suitable time of the year. The weather was clear and peaceful, not too cold or too hot. It was just right. Outside the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing restaurant, the white pears on both sides of the road gradually fell, and the snow-white viburnum flowers followed closely behind. A lush flower branch happened to fall by the window, clustered together like an umbrella, but also somewhat like an embroidered ball. It was very pleasing to the eye. But in this kind of weather, Ning Shu suddenly felt a sense of oppression like adding oil to a fire. Facing the scorching gazes in front of her, she forced a smile, not letting herself show fear. She glanced from the corner of her eyes and suddenly found an acquaintance among the musicians who were called in to liven things up. It was Chun Niang, whom she met at the moon-embracing lake. She let out a long sigh of relief in her heart and put on her most appropriate smile. Sirs, my daughter ate a little too much for lunch, so I'm not hungry yet. Sirs, please eat first. Recently, my daughter has been quite interested in the zither. It's rare that Miss Chun Niang is here today, so I'd like to take this opportunity to learn from her. After Ning Shu bowed, she stiffly bypassed the 3 big Buddhas and walked in the direction of Chun Niang. Unexpectedly, she had only taken a few steps when she suddenly stepped on something and her whole body fell to the side. Coincidentally, she was sitting on one knee on an empty soft seat. Under the stunned gazes of everyone in the room, half of her body fell into someone's arms. What entered her eyes was a refreshing frost, and a faint doohung fragrance lingered on the tip of her nose. She was wearing a blue dress today, elegant and charming. Suddenly, she blended in with the frost, closely and harmoniously, as if they were born together and should not be separated. Xiao Yuni frowned. Shu Tan Siwei was stunned. Ning, Lady Ning. Hui Mo almost laughed out loud in his heart, and said proudly, "It seems that Lady Ning is willing to sit with my family's young master." His words brought Ning Shu back from her daze. She hurriedly got up from his arms. "It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. My daughter accidentally slipped and bumped into your highness. I ask your highness to forgive my daughter's offense." But the little deer in her heart ran out of the circle as if it was drunk. Ning Shu attributed it to the fact that he was dressed too coquettishly today. He was obviously out to attract bees and butterflies, and no one could resist him. She laughed dryly and awkwardly struggled in this deadly azura field. "I won't disturb you. I'll go and ask Chun Niang to teach me how to play the zither. Sirs, please do as you please." Ning Shu was about to flee when she heard Xiahou Qing, who had been silent all this time, suddenly clenched his fist and coughed softly. Cough, cough. Hui Mo was stunned. He thought that the young master had just taken the medicine when he came to the banquet. How could he cough again? The next moment, he suddenly had an idea. He used all the cleverness of his 800 lifetimes at this moment. He hurriedly put on a worried and self-reproachful expression. "Master, are you coughing again? I'm so stupid. I left the medicine in the mansion and didn't bring it out. What should I do?" Hui Mo's face was filled with anxiety. In the end, he could only plead with Ning Shu that medicine was mixed with other medicines. Other than this servant, no one can tell it apart. This servant has to go back and get it personally. But my young master doesn't like strangers to serve him. So I can only ask you to take care of all the servants in the house. My young master has a disease in his eyes and can't see. It's common for him to get hurt if no one takes care of him. Miss, please take care of young master for me. I'll be back in a moment." After that, he didn't wait for Ning Shu to agree or refuse. Hui Mo forced her to sit beside Xiahou Qing and then ran away in a hurry. But when he went downstairs, he was smiling happily. Chapter 168. Ning Shu finally understood how Zhao Kuangyin felt when he was forced to wear the emperor's robe. Ha! Ha ha! The reason that Hui Mo found was too dignified. If she refused, she would be heartless. She lowered her head and numbly picked up the chopsticks under the burning gaze of the people. She put some food into the porcelain bowl beside Xiahou Qing's hand and said like a wooden person, "Your Highness, please." Xiahou Qing's lips moved slightly and said, "Thank you." During the meal, Ning Shu felt like she was sitting on a needle. It was the first time that she was so against the chasing cloud and moon chasing restaurant. Opposite her, Xiao Yuni's gaze almost burned through her. Tan Siwei's gaze was also extremely confused, not to mention the other two officials of the Ministry of Justice. They looked as if they wanted to immediately spread what they had seen and heard at the banquet so that all their colleagues could carefully savor it together. Finally, the meal came to an end. Ning Shu was about to let out a sigh of relief when she heard Xiao Yuni put down the wine cup and said coldly, "Prince Xiahou, I'm afraid there's something that I have to remind you. Since the Prince Xiahou's princess consort has been decided, then it's best that you don't provoke some people that you shouldn't provoke." Xiahou Qing leisurely responded, "May I ask the sixth prince, the marriage ceremony, the acceptance ceremony, the big betrothal gifts, and the invitation ceremony, none of these have been carried out. It was only a hasty drawing of lots, and the person who was chosen has now disappeared without a trace. How does the sixth prince affirm that the candidate for my southern pacifying Wang Fu's heir consort has already been decided? Also, who are the people that I, Xiahou Qing, shouldn't provoke? I, Xiahou Qing, shouldn't provoke, but sixth prince can? I've long heard that Prince Xiahou is very smart. Today, I've seen it for myself. Sixth Prince Xiahou Qing is also good at concealing his strength and biding his time." The two people were arguing with each other, but in fact, they were fighting with their swords. Fortunately, Tan Siwei was quick-witted and mediated the situation. "He, your highnesses are both dragons and phoenixes among men. This lowly official admires both of you. This lowly official boldly proposes a toast to your highnesses." Ning Shu was speechless. She turned to the two officials of the Ministry of Justice, who were as quiet as wooden chickens, and asked, May I ask the two officials, how is the interrogation going at the Imperial Astronomer? Did you get any useful information from the interrogation? The Imperial Astronomer's divination was the origin of the whole case, and also the first thread in the whole mess. If it could be solved, then the rest would be easily solved. Unfortunately, the two shook their heads in unison. We've detained all 38 members of the Imperial Astronomer and interrogated them one by one. We've been interrogating them day and night, but we haven't found anything yet. But don't worry, Miss Ning, we'll inform you as soon as we have good news. Thank you, my lords. Ning Shu nodded her head in thanks. With a perturbed heart, Ning Shu looked left and right. Finally, Huemore arrived late and the banquet ended. Tan Siwei bowed to the few people. Thank you for coming to the banquet today. If I have done anything wrong, please forgive me. I only hope that we can solve the case as soon as possible and find Miss Qi so that we can live up to the Emperor's kindness. In short, you will have to work hard in the near future. Everyone politely returned the greeting. Ning Shu used the excuse of catching up with Chun Niang. She stayed for a while and finally sent the few Buddhas away. Chun Niang's mind was clear. When she saw Ning Shu coming over with a bitter smile, she gently plucked a string of melodious music. Under the music, she covered her mouth and laughed softly. She joked with Ning Shu. Lady Ning is really charming. Good Chun Niang, don't make fun of me. Ning Shu begged with a bitter smile. Then, she thought of something and asked, have you sent Lan Xiong and Niinu's ashes back to Qingju? Yes, Lan Xiong disguised herself as Niinu and became friends with me. Her biggest wish was to find a good sister and return to her hometown with her. I can be considered as half of her bosom friend. If I don't fulfill this wish for her, who can fulfill her wish? In the end, we are just rootless duckweeds floating in the world. Chun Niang said with emotion. Her eyes were red and she quickly blinked her eyes to stop herself. Oh, why am I saying these depressing words for no reason? Previously, when the pleasure boat caught fire, I had nowhere to go. The procuress almost sold me to the brothel. Thanks to Lady Ning's recommendation to Prince Ku for me, I have such a good shelter. Chun Niang is very grateful. It's just a small matter. Chun Niang, if you continue to be so polite, you will be estranged from me. Ning Shu smiled and then returned to the topic. Chun Niang, you should have heard about the case that happened in the past 2 days, right? To be honest, I have something to ask you. Chapter 169. Are you talking about the disappearance of 4th Miss Qi in the Imperial Palace? Chun Niang couldn't help but sigh. This matter has been blown out of proportion. Who in the entire capital doesn't know about it? I heard many guests in the restaurant talking about it. They all said that it's related to the 13th princess. Some people also said that it's the doing of the wolf demon who has been pestering 4th Miss Qi. Both the truth and the lies made people terrified. What, is there anything I can help you with? Feel free to ask. As long as I know, I'll tell you everything. Ning Shu didn't beat around the bush and asked directly, Chun Niang, have you ever heard of a demon that can transform into a human, or a person that can transform into a demon? Chun Niang lived in the mortal world. She had dealt with the highest nobles, merchants, and peddlers. In her line of work, she seemed to be humble and inconspicuous. In fact, the things she had heard of might even be beyond the reach of the Imperial College. Therefore, Ning Shu asked this question. Chun Niang frowned and thought carefully. She deliberated and said, I've seen a lot of demons or demons that can transform into humans in novels. I've also seen it on the stage. Other than that, I've never heard of anyone talking about it. Maybe it's because I don't know much. How about this, when I have time, I'll ask all the sisters I know. If I get any news, I'll immediately inform you. Ning Shu thanked her solemnly, then I'll have to trouble Chun Niang and my sisters. Women like us who float in the mortal world have always been despised and looked down upon. How many people can treat us sisters like humans like you? There's an old saying that a gentleman will die for his bosom friend. What's the big deal about doing something for you? After bidding farewell to Chun Niang, Ning Shu walked out of the Chasing Cloud and Moon restaurant. She rubbed her temples and felt that the meal just now was more difficult than solving the case. Forsythia had been waiting at the door for a long time. When she saw Ning Shu coming out, she hurriedly opened the curtain and helped her into the carriage. Zigui was already waiting for her in the carriage with the news. Ning Shu did not beat around the bush and asked directly, "Where are the servants of the Qi family who followed Qi Zhaoyu into the palace?" Zigui said, "They testified to each other that before fourth young mistress Qi went missing, they were always together and none of them left. The probability of them committing a crime together was too low. The Supreme Court considered that they were both from the Qi family and could be considered half a victim, so they were temporarily released back to the Qi family. However, they were ordered not to leave the residence in the near future and to be summoned at any time." Ning Shu nodded. The Supreme Court's arrangement was not without reason. After all, outsiders staying in the palace for a long time was not a long-term solution. She continued, "You must keep a close eye on them. They served them all the way. Even when Qi Zhanyu went to rest, they were still guarding outside. I don't believe that there is a monster that can silently and invisibly steal people out of thin air. Qi Jueyu's disappearance may be related to one of them. Your subordinate will go right away." Zigui was swift and decisive in his actions. He jumped off the carriage after receiving the order. Ning Shu quietly thought about the many puzzling mysteries in the case in the carriage. She tried to find the hidden common points and connect them together. Her thoughts were like lightning when the carriage stopped for some reason. She lifted the curtain and asked, "What's going on?" Forsythia pouted and pointed to the front. Ning Shu looked over and saw an extremely familiar carriage was leisurely parked diagonally in front of them. It was also the corner that they had to pass to return to the residence. The coachman was very lively and even waved at them from afar. Who else could it be other than Huemo? Ning Shu's molars silently itched. She smiled, her face full of fragrance. She lifted the hem of her skirt and got off the carriage. She unceremoniously boarded the carriage of the southern pacifying Wang Fu. She faced Xiahou Qing, who was drinking tea and resting inside and quietly waiting for her to arrive, and questioned him, "Your Highness, why did you play with my daughter like that at the banquet?" Without anyone else present, Ning Shu's tone could not help but have a hint of condemnation. Chapter 170. What are you talking about? In the face of Ning Shu's questioning, Xiahou Qing was still leisurely and complacent. Ning Shu said, "Your Highness was talking with the sixth prince at the banquet just now. It was very lively. Xiao Yuni and Tan Siwei had already given her enough headaches. This noble immortal also inexplicably got involved. Did he think that she was dying too slowly? Recently, there have been several incredible cases surrounding me, so my heart is inevitably complicated. I casually talked with the sixth prince for a while. Is there a problem?" Ning Shu took out a round bead from her sleeve. "Then what about this bead that made me slip?" Xiahou Qing gently turned the azure teacup in his hand. The silver needle in the teacup was floating and the light green tea water was sparkling as he turned it. He asked, "What bead? How big or small is it?" Ning Shu looked down and carefully looked at the slightly blunt round bead. "It's the size of a rice grain. The color is not bad. It's SOSO. Xiahou Qing did not answer her. He knocked on the small table and asked Hui Mo to come in. "When did our Lord Pingnan's mansion have such a worthless bead?" Hui Mo poked his head in from outside and looked at the bead that Ning Shu patted on the small table. He opened his mouth and said, "Master, such a low-class bead can't even roll over the threshold of the Lord Pingnan's mansion." After Hui Mo finished speaking, Xiahou Qing smiled slightly and raised his eyebrows at Ning Shu. Ning Shu was suddenly speechless. Thinking about it, it seemed to be right. The Crown Prince of Nanping was not ordinary when he did not make a move. Once he made a move, it must be extraordinary. What huge Eastern bead, gold foil hidden weapon, he was so extravagant that it made people's heart ache. Such an inconspicuous bead was indeed very incompatible with this person. Could it be that she was overthinking things? Ning Shu forced a smile and softened her tone. She silently leaned closer to the heir of Xiahou, who had always been difficult to deal with, and apologized, I'm very sorry that I misunderstood your highness. I hope that your highness will forgive me and don't be calculative with my daughter. Fortunately, Xiahou Qing was very magnanimous. It doesn't matter. Just don't do it again. He let the matter pass. Hui Mo retracted his head and hurriedly sat back on the driver's seat. He secretly stuck out his tongue where Ning Xu couldn't see and felt guilty. It was true that such beads couldn't enter the Nanping mansion, but there were many of them on the curtains of the Chasing Cloud and Moon Tower. They weren't valuable, so no one would notice if one or two of them were missing. However, he felt that it would be better for him to swallow this small detail into his stomach quietly. In fact, Ning Xu didn't think of it. It was just that she didn't dare to suspect that the heir of Nanping Mansion would make a move on the bead curtains of the Chasing Cloud and Moon Tower. She only thought that the bead curtains had loosened and a few of them fell, causing her to be unlucky. Hui Mo felt guilty and quietly listened to the heir of Nanping Mansion. He said indifferently, "What have you figured out so far? How did your highness know that I already have an idea?" Ning Xu blinked and was a little curious. "You stayed in the Chasing Cloud and Moon Tower just now to ask Chun Niang for help. If you didn't have doubts in your heart, you wouldn't have asked." Having been completely guessed by Xiahou Qing, Ning Xu suddenly felt as if she had found a soulmate in the twists and turns of the mountain road. This feeling was very strange. In the past 300 years, she had met countless people and met countless ghosts. Only this person could always guess what she was thinking. She didn't have this feeling even when she was the most intimate with Xiao Yuni in her previous life. Xiahou Qing's figure was clearly reflected in her eyes. He was dressed in frost and looked elegant. As long as he stepped out of the carriage, the girls in the nearby streets would immediately surround him and scream crazily. Ning Xu's eyes couldn't help but ripple slightly and she looked away. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure